welcome you to another live edition of the Sports Box, your go-to sports podcast featuring great content, conversation, and your occasional disagreement. Stick around to interact and ask questions. The Sports Box is brought to you by our sponsor, Showcase Sports, located on the White Horse Pike in Hamilton, New Jersey. Showcase Sports for the elite player. Ladies and gentlemen, it's showtime.
What is up, ladies and gentlemen? We are back once again with another episode of Sweet Tea here on the Sports Box Network. It has been quite a while, but after almost a year away, we are back with the Season 5 opener of the Sweet Tea Show. As always, I am your host, Noah Dogdobber, representing the back-to-back national champions, the Georgia Bulldogs, joined by my co-host and good buddy, Garth Charger Patrick, representing his Florida Gators. And Garth, you know, I brought it up to you before the show, but, you know, it seems like there's some excrement on your chest and hat. What's that all about, man?
Good to be back, man. It's crazy to think it's already season 5. That's kind of mind-blowing, honestly, that it's gone by that quickly. But doing pretty good, man. Obviously, really excited to be on here. Football season is literally right around the corner. August starts up, I believe, like the end of next week. Week 0 starts the third weekend in August. Week 1, the final weekend in August. So it's coming really, really fast. Me and Noah, actually, in preparation for the show, have both been hard at work on the recruitment trail, trying to land all those 4 and 5 stars prospects in NCAA 25. So we've been kind of unintentionally preparing for this show, Noah. And like I said, just really fired up to be on here again.
Yeah, man. Sean Dawkins was able to double the recruit class size of the Stanford Cardinal in only the span of 4 weeks. So I don't know what the previous coach was doing. Maybe he was doing something he shouldn't behind the scenes, but we've been killing it, man. And past 2 weeks have just been perfect to get us back in that college football mood. And unironically, it's actually helped kind of refresh my knowledge a bit, because since the offseason is so friggin' long, there's a lot of stuff you kind of forget about, since you got to wait like 8 months pretty much to get back in the mood for it again. But we're fired up. We're ready to go here tonight. We got a couple comments coming in already. Our boy Went coming in saying, here we go.
Resident Ohio State fan.
Yeah.
Crying Ryan Day.
Crying Day, good old fat Chip Kelly at offensive coordinator. Will Howard at quarterback. We're going to talk about the Big Ten soon. Not tonight, probably next week or so. But and Brad Mangold says, go Ducks. Yep, former team of the Pac-2. Now in the Big Ten this season. So my boy Dan Lanning as head coach. But we're not talking about the Big Ten tonight. We're going to be talking about our favorite conference, the one that we know the best as well, which is the SEC. We're not going to be talking too much about Florida, because we're going to be talking more about teams that actually have a shot at winning the SEC instead of teams that are probably going 4-8. But yeah, Garth, we got a ton to get into. But first of all, before we get in the predictions, I got a little job for you that you're going to be doing throughout the season. So last season, you introduced the idea of counters. The one you like to do was back-to-back counter. But I've added another one. So you're in charge of not only the back-to-back counter, but I have also added a new counter for you, which is the boat race counter that you can keep track of through the year. So I know
that number remains very low.
Yeah, we'll see. But I know I already said back-to-back, so I'll go ahead and do that one for you. But for the rest, it's your responsibility, and I got them pinned right at the very top of the banners. So, yeah. But we're also going to be doing predictions throughout the season like we did last year. We did not complete last season, but when I last counted up, I was actually winning. So go figure, the 1 year I probably would have won. Didn't quite work out. But we're going to be doing that again this year, and hopefully I do not have to do another BS punishment talking up those Florida Gators, because can't stand them. And Guy Who Burps over on Twitch says, hello, boys. Nice stream. Appreciate it, man.
What's up, man? How are you tonight?
This is our first time streaming to Twitch. We usually just do Facebook and YouTube, so we'll see how that goes throughout the show. But yeah, like I said, we're going to be doing our SEC preview and predictions. So we're going to be at least briefly discussing every team in the SEC. We're also going to predict who we think will win awards, so offensive player, defensive player, freshman of the year, coach of the year. We're also going to pick one team we think will overachieve and one we think will overachieve, and obviously the two teams that make the SEC championship game now with no divisions and who we think wins the SEC. At the very end, I got a little game as well for Garth to go through to kind of test his knowledge a little bit, see if he actually knows what he's talking about or if he's just all talk. So, but I'm good. Glad you're here. We're going to get right into it. We're going to start with the team that won the SEC last season. Unfortunately, it was not the Georgia Bulldogs, but it was Alabama, who won it over UGA in a very tight contest. Guard, definitely a nerve-wracking one for me to watch, 27-24. Lost to Michigan overtime in the CFP, and obviously Michigan went on to win the whole thing. And looking at Alabama's roster, Guard, they have a very strong core coming back. They still got Jalen Milroe at quarterback, Jam Miller, and Justice Haynes in the backfield is a nice solid one, too. They still got Kendrick Law, Kobe Prentice, and then they got Jeremy Bernard, who used to play for Michigan State. I got to tell you, man, this guy just keeps lighting me up every time I play him in freaking college football 25. But I've known him for a good few years. He's a good player. They still have CJ Dipper as well at tight end. Solid defense, although they did lose Caleb Downs, my boy from Mill Creek High School, to the transfer portal, went to Ohio State. So it's going to be interesting to see how they kind of cope there. But obviously the main storyline with them is that Nick Saban did retire, accepted a job with, I believe, Game Day, and was replaced by Kalen DeBoer, who we know very well. He was the head coach of Washington last season, took him to the title game, has, I believe, like a 104-12 career record, head coaching record in his career, but a lot of that was with lower division schools. For FBS jobs, he's most well known for Fresno State and Washington. So the main story with them, Garth, even though they still have a very solid roster, is what do you think they're going to do in the first season under Kalen DeBoer? Let's start with you on this one.
Yeah, so two things real quick now before I jump into thoughts on Kalen DeBoer. One other guy worth mentioning is Caden Proctor back, who transferred about 32 times total to help shore up that offensive line that was kind of very up and down last year. They caught a lot of flack because they definitely weren't up to the standard that we're used to seeing. But then they did have some moments where they looked halfway decent. And then two, just a little fun fact for the audience tonight. The only team that Nick Saban ever lost to in the SEC championship game was Urban Meyer and the Florida Gators. But to jump into DeBoer, really good coach, Noah. I'm a big fan of him personally. But still, it's a huge jump to go to the SEC. We've seen a lot of guys either not cut it or take a few years to get used to the level of competition. And I know firsthand with Urban Meyer, he really, really struggled actually at first, which some people might find it a surprise. But it really wasn't until Chris Lee got to be a senior and he got Tim Tebow in there where they started to, start trending in the right direction, winning some football games. But my biggest question mark is just how fast does it take him, to make the adjustment to the SEC. The schedule is not going to do them any favors because, like you said, the conference absolutely loaded. No more divisions. Good news for him, like you said, though, he does return a lot from last year's team. He was able to, for the most part, keep that roster together that just went to the national championship. But, he's got to still be able to recruit well, and he's got to be able to win those big-time games because I don't think they're going to have any problems with, the teams that they should beat still. It's just, can he go out and beat, the LSUs, even Ole Miss with Lane Kiffin now, they're trending upwards. Texas A&M with Mike Elko might be a little bit of a more challenging team than they've been in recent years. And then obviously teams like your Georgia Bulldogs. So really that's the question mark for me. Can he adjust to the SEC? And if so, how long does it take?
Couple comments coming in. Brandon saying no one from the Gators are winning any of those awards, of course. Let's fucking go, boys. Which, of course, always fires up our boy Mikey Bradley.
Mikey.
Sure ain't going to be a West Wagner going to win any either. Um, our boy Ray Leo says the boys are back, but it's the wrong sport. Yeah, man. We love hockey, but college football has always been our number one. Rutgers 2024 national champs. Well, it's funny you mentioned that, Ray, actually. Garth is doing Rutgers for his dynasty in college football 25, and apparently they're undefeated. So
yeah, so far. Still very early in the season, Ray, but I've got them undefeated so far.
Guy Who Burps says, I have a question. Anyone throughout the show, get your questions in.
Also, too, sorry, not to interrupt you, but I just realized I didn't really answer the question of what do I expect him to do in year one. I would say overall probably has a really solid year because of the roster and because he is still a very high level coach in terms of how much winning he's done. But I could definitely see them like just barely missing out on a SEC championship game appearance, maybe by like a game or two. And still, the playoffs is going to be really tough to predict how that shakes out this far out. But I would say at least making a decent bowl game and, maybe something like 9-3 or 10-2, but still missing out on an SEC title game is kind of where I'm feeling on that one.
Yeah, it's tough. I'm looking at their schedule right now, and they do have some tough games. So out of conference, they actually have a road game against Wisconsin, which I think Alabama's a better team than Wisconsin. But, I mean, Wisconsin always has really strong defenses and is a road game, against a Power 5 team. Luke Fickell, I think, is a good coach. So that could be a tough game. They do play Georgia, but it is at Bryant-Denny, which I think is an advantage for them. At Vanderbilt, South Carolina, and then they play Tennessee at Neyland, which the last time they played them at Neyland, they lost. Missouri was really good last season, beat Ohio State in the bowl game. At LSU, so in Baton Rouge this year. At Oklahoma as well, and then obviously Iron Bowl at the end. It doesn't matter the records of those games. Those games always seem to go down the wire. So it's definitely no cupcake schedule by any means. I know that's something that a lot of people like to criticize Alabama for, but they do actually have a really tough, or sort of tough out of conference game against Wisconsin. I do like the roster still. I think one move that they made that really helps them is they got rid of that terrible center they had last season. He transferred, had about, I swear, like 10 horrific snaps all season, and then the offseason comes and he's like, I'm such, I expect better, and I'm like, maybe you should learn to snap the ball. But he's gone. They replaced him with Parker Brailsford, who I believe was he's a preseason All-American, so he should do pretty good for him. I mean, it won't be hard to do a little better than that guy they had last season. But
I think too, though, Jalen Milroe having that full season under his belt should help him a lot too, because if for anybody who remembers early on last season, he honestly was really, really bad, and people were calling for him to be benched. There was a quarterback competition like in the middle of the season. He ended up coming on later in the year and playing much better than how he started. So, anything can happen. Obviously, brand new system for him, but I do expect him to be improved from last year. Probably mainly so just be more consistent. You shouldn't see as many, like, what the hell is this guy doing? Or, really bad games where he has a bunch of turnovers.
Yeah, I remember Milroe did get benched actually in that UCF game, or the USF game. They played, about 3 quarterbacks, and luckily for Milroe, the other guys were pretty bad as well, so he got another chance, and I think he ran with it. I think he's very talented. I mean, the guy is a bazooka for an arm. As he gets more experience, I think he'll definitely improve. I think he's a good quarterback. I don't think he will hold the team back or anything like that. I think what might hold them back is, obviously it's going to be a year of transition going from, you go from literally the greatest coach of all time. Like, they're not going to, there will be some decline in my opinion, but they still get good recruits. I don't think they're going to fall off a cliff like some people think. I do still think they'll be one of the top teams in the SEC. I don't know if they'll make the title game. I wouldn't say it's impossible. As for the playoffs, I think it is possible they make it because there's 12 teams. If it was a 14 playoff, I probably would not expect them to make the playoffs because they do have some tough games, but I do still think they'll be up there. Ray says top 5 in recruiting this year. Maybe they won't blow leads like they did last year and almost make me throw my TV out the window. Next team, obviously we're going to talk about these guys as well. They were actually the SEC runners-up, but funny enough, Garth, actually the highest ranked SEC team at the end of last season because Alabama did lose to Michigan. And then the Georgia Bulldogs, who, coming in that game, were the back-to-back national champions. Just absolutely, I mean, it was one of the biggest demolition jobs I've ever seen. And yes, I know FSU had a ton of players opt out, but I mean, even in the second half, Georgia had their backups and third stringers, and they still outscored them like 21 or 28 to nothing. I mean, that team, I don't know what the hell happened. I mean, just losing Jordan Travis and, a couple guys opting out. I mean, you still got to have pride to go out there and not get absolutely demolished, but they did. So Georgia ended, I think, as number 4, and Alabama was number 5, something like that. But, it was a bit of an off year, and it's funny to say that even though they only lost one game. But, just speaking from personal experience, guard, since I watch every game, the 2021 and 2022 teams had a kind of unbeatable vibe, if you will, to where, you felt like they could win every game. Whereas the 2023, even though, they were undefeated going the SEC championship game, there were a lot of games, if you watch them, to where they really struggled throughout a lot of it and kind of had to claw back towards the end. Like ones I can remember off the top of my head. The South Carolina game, I think they were losing at halftime. They just had a terrible first half. Carson Beck missed a wide open Oscar Delp. I remember that. They had to rebound and win that game. The Auburn game, they were horrible the first 3 quarters, and they needed some absolute heroics from Carson Beck in the fourth quarter, converting like a 3rd and 13 or something like that to win that game by 7. Granted, it was at Jordan Hare, so I mean, like if that game was at Sanford, I don't know if it would have even been close. Obviously, Alabama, they were slow starting in that game. But then they had other games where they just like looked like the old Georgia of old. I remember I think they just slaughtered Kentucky by like 50 points or something like that. Florida, I know, 43-20. The game really wasn't even that close. Like it was more like a 43-6. And then in the fourth quarter, kind of let up a bit defensively because the game was over, and Florida, I think, scored some consolation points. By the way, I was actually at that game. And what an experience that was, man. My favorite highlight of that game was a Florida fan right near me got up at halftime and left, and he was yelling at the Florida fans near him, "Next year, we fucking suck." So that was fun. But
what's funny, or not really funny, but interesting rather, Noah, is we might finally have a home and home series. And don't get me wrong, I love neutral site, and that's like the tradition of the series. But for those who don't know, TIAA Bank Stadium, their home of the Jacksonville Jaguars, is going to be undergoing some massive renovations. I believe, don't quote me on this, but I want to say it's like after the 2025 season ends. So there's going to be like a season or 2 to where they physically won't be able to play there. And it's still nothing's set in stone, but very, very likely that we get a home and home series before it transitions back to the neutral site. So that would definitely be cool. And if that happens, me and Noah would absolutely have to go to both games. That would be such a cool experience.
yeah, man, I completely agree. I will say this, now that I've actually seen the stadium in person, you don't think much of it when you're watching an NFL game. You're like, oh, it's just the Jaguars stadium. But then you see it in person. It's actually a really nice stadium. It might not be the best, but it's a pretty cool stadium. I actually really enjoyed it. And the weather was perfect, too, for that game. It was a little cloudy, so a lot of the sun was actually blocked out. It wasn't, I mean, it was hot, but it wasn't, scorching hot, like 98 degrees or anything like that. And obviously, the game was a lot of fun for me to watch. It wasn't fun for the Florida fans, but, I think we will have a bit of a closer game this season. Josh McMurray says, I'll go to Athens for that game. I'll drive to that game. And Brian says, hello, longtime listener, first-time caller. I know it's not college, but did you see the Jordan Love contract? I heard about it, but I haven't seen the numbers. I
have to admit, I have not seen the contract. I saw like the headline, but I didn't really read into it. Just loosely following NFL the last couple of weeks, been more so in the college mode because of the new game and the season coming up. And then obviously hoping and really excited for my Chargers getting Harbaugh. Hopefully we can stop choking and actually win some games and win some games in the postseason at that.
Welcome back, boys. Missed you. Thank you, Brian. It's great to be back, man. 4-2-20. that is pretty. Tua got like what was it, like 51 million 4 years, which these contracts are kind of nuts, but at the same time, it's how the market works. Every guy wants to be the next highest paid. We'll look at these contracts 2 years from now when a guy's making 70 million per year, and it's just going to be like, big deal. But yeah, highest paid quarterback in NFL history. That's just how it goes. I don't think it's impossible a few years down the line to where we have $100 million per year contract by any means. But regardless, back to college. Enough rambling about random UGA factoids. The question for UGA I have here is, can they return to college football playoff prominence? Now, I didn't say the college football playoff because, let's be honest, I know they have a really tough schedule. They play Alabama, Texas, and Ole Miss all on the road. But because of the 12-team playoff, Garth, you can lose 2, maybe 3 games and still make it in as a lower seed. So there is some margin for error. If it was a 14 playoff, I might have some serious concerns. But because it's now a 12-team playoff, and as objectively speaking as possible, I do still think UGA has the most talented roster. And with Nick Saban leaving, that definitely makes me a lot more confident because he was always a major roadblock, it seemed, for us every single year. But, is this a team that can go on a run to the semifinal or get back to a national championship game? I think that's the question. I think that should be the aim. I believe they can do it, but I think they got to win 2 of those 3 games. They got to beat 2 out of the 3 of Ole Miss, Texas, and Alabama, which means they have to win 2 of those 3 games on the road. It's not going to be easy. They do play all 3 of those teams at home next year as well, because I guess it's a home and home scheduling or whatever. But I don't think it's impossible. But they don't want it. The reason I think they need to win 2 of those 3 games is because they don't want to be in a situation like they were last year, Garth, where they have to win the championship game or else they're basically out. They don't want that type of pressure again. I knew as soon as they lost that game, even though they were 12-1 and they only lost by 3, that they were going to miss out because the conference champions all had very strong records and resumes, and that was even with the FSU being undefeated and getting left out. So I would prefer if, going into the championship game, they only have 1 loss. I think that would basically guarantee they make the playoffs. I don't know if they saying they win the SEC is tough because I think Texas and Alabama are really good. I think there's potential for other dark horses as well. I do think that on paper they're the best team still because they're returning a lot. They still got Carson Beck. They had Trevor Etienne, former Gator, into the backfield to go with Roderick and Branson Robinson. Oscar Delp will take that step with Brock Bowers gone. They still got Dominic Lovett, London Humphreys. They got in transfer wide receiver from Vanderbilt. Unfortunately, they did just lose one of their receivers today because he's apparently a piece of shit. But, it happens, man. It's kind of the UGA litmus test at this point. I still think they're strong in the trenches. I think Malachi Starks is an animal at safety. Dalen Everett, promising cornerback. So I do think they'll make the CFP, probably win the SEC, but I wouldn't, confidently bet on it or anything like that. What's your read on this UGA team besides all the, comical drunk driving arrests and stuff like that on the field?
Yeah, so, honestly, no, I expect a really good season from them yet again. Kirby's still there. He's been recruiting fantastically every single year in, year out. So the talent just keeps getting replenished. They return a lot, like you said, Carson Beck, a lot of those other guys. Also, one of my favorite players, despite being a rival team of mine, Swal Munden, still there at linebacker to help shore up that front 7. They return too much. They added another really good recruitment class. They had some good portal guys, like you said, London Humphreys, stud wide receiver from Vanderbilt. My guy ETN to bolster, and still it seems like every year, whether it's the same guys returning or a whole new cast, they've got that powerful running back by committee. I fully expect them to make the playoff. You could debate on which seed, obviously, but I think them making it is pretty much set in stone unless they have some kind of like massive collapse this year, which I would not bet on. Whether or not they win the SEC, I think it's it's so hard to judge because there's a lot of what ifs this year. Like, does Texas take a step back since they lost so much to the draft, or do they keep that momentum running and they're right there in the mix? Oklahoma, I think, has a sneaky good team. Their biggest question mark is what are they going to get out of the quarterback position? Because that's really going to limit or help how far they can go this year. Ole Miss has a really, really good roster on paper after they went out and just absolutely backed up the Brinks trucks and the transfer portal to bring in all those guys that they brought in. But I got to see them actually play some football first before. And also, too, Lane Kiffin. It seems like he is the king of having pretty good seasons, but not being able to win those really, really big must-win games that get him over the hump. And then Mizzou, too. I don't know what to fully expect from them this year because I do really like Drinkowitz. Fantastic offensive scheme there with Brady Quinn, or Cook, rather. Luther Burden is still there. Fantastic wide receiver, arguably the best in the SEC, and maybe, all of college football. We'll have to see what kind of year he can have this year. But yeah, I feel like college football playoffs for sure, and a really, really good shot that they win the SEC again as well. But, regardless, should have a really good year. Like you said, it's really, for me, it's those 3 road games. Because whenever you go on the road, it's kind of the great equalizer when they have that really good home field advantage. Ole Miss, not so much, nothing against them, but I don't think they have like that really crazy, tough to play in atmosphere there. But definitely Texas and obviously Alabama as well. So those will determine for sure if they make it into the SEC game and win it. But I think regardless, you're going to see them in the CFP.
On the game, I was fucking muted the whole time. I just realized because I was in another tab. That's just great. But what I was saying is that besides those 3 road games that we just mentioned, they do have other tough games. They have Clemson at home, which is, a home field advantage really because it's in Atlanta, but still a tough game. They have rivalry games against Auburn and Tennessee, also at home, but not teams you can look past. Same with Georgia Tech. So, I mean, I expect them to be in the CFP and probably win the SEC, but it won't be easy by any means. I got a couple comments coming in as well. Our buddy Tom says, great to see the show back. Go Irish. What's up, Tom?
What's up, Tom?
And Josh says, Georgia is the team to beat, but Texas is capable of beating them. Ole Miss is my dark horse in the SEC. Backing up those Brinks trucks. As Garth
Like
said,
I said, Ole Miss's roster on paper, Noah, it looks really, really good. It looks like if you were to go onto a video game and just throw together like the highest overall guys you could find from various teams. But it's still the question mark of, one, does it actually pan out? Because talent and like the hype factor definitely doesn't win you every game. And 2, Lane, he's proven that he can have really good years, but he hasn't proven that he can win those big time games against like a Georgia to get over the hump.
Next thing I want to talk about is this is going to be a very weird year in the SEC. It's a revolutionary year, not just for the SEC, but for all of college football, because of all the realignments and all the changes that have come to each conference. So major year of transition. Oklahoma and Texas now join the conference, and the SEC will have no divisions for the first time since 1991, which is the same for every conference except the Sun Belt, which is going to be very interesting. So, Garth, this is kind of a 2-part question here, but, our thoughts on these teams joining the SEC and the non-divisional format. I guess I'll go first on this one since I don't want you to, it's kind of unfair if you go first every time. But I think this was kind of inevitable. I think it's most glaring with the Big Ten, to where, basically you had the three best teams of the Big Ten every year were in the same division, and it was kind of like whichever team won the Michigan-Ohio State game was the de facto champion, because the other team on the other side would be like a 3-loss Iowa or Purdue, who just stood absolutely no chance, and we get blown out by 50 points. I think the Big 12 has had it like this for years, to where it was just the top two teams in the conference would compete for the conference title game instead of, the top teams in each division. I don't have a major problem with it, except for the fact that I do think it hurts protected rivalries. I think it's okay as long as you protect the best rivalries. There's some that are inevitably going to be lost because of all the crazy realignment and, just freaking West Coast teams in the ACC and crap like that. Big Ten as well. Like, that's inevitable. But as long as they protect as many rivalries as they possibly can, I don't have a major issue with it. As for Oklahoma and Texas, I think Texas instantly, we saw what they were freaking 10 yards away from being in the title game last season. Texas is instantly one of the best teams at SEC, in my opinion, which, don't get me wrong, if you asked me that when this news was first announced a few years ago, I would have never expected that to be the case. But right now, I'd say it would. I definitely say they're easily a top 3 team in the SEC, if not more. Like Josh said, I think they're probably the biggest challenger to UGA currently. And Oklahoma, I don't think they'll compete right away, but I think with Venables at head coach, he's really good. I think he's going to have them getting going in the right direction. Their offense is still solid. Their biggest question mark is quarterback. I think their season will go as however Jackson Arnold goes. But the defense is getting better, and with Venables' background as a DC, I think it'll only continue to get better. But I think, 2 or 3 years from now is when we'll really be talking about Oklahoma as, a big player in the SEC. Not right away. But I don't have a problem with them joining. Obviously, it's a money move, like all these moves are, and it's going to help the SEC make a lot of money. But I also think they're really good teams, and I think they are worthy of being in the SEC. What were your thoughts? First of all, just, maybe some thoughts on Oklahoma and Texas, your predictions for them, but also the non-divisional format this year.
Yeah, so it'd be interesting to get used to not having the divisions anymore, obviously, Noah, but it's kind of a love-hate thing for me, where I do like it, that the fact that it's going to be the top 2 teams versus you could have like 2 or 3 really, really good teams in one side of the division. But because one has like a tiebreaker or one is just one win better, they completely lose out on the title game. Whereas, now we're going to get the best 2 teams overall every single year for the title game. I think Texas and Oklahoma, especially because they started to really get things going in the past couple of years, are now good additions, where if this was like 4 or 5 years ago, I'd be like, what the heck? Both of these teams are kind of a shell of what they used to be, with a ton of uncertainty. But obviously, like you said, Texas almost made it to the championship game. They returned a lot. Oklahoma had it in the right direction. So really good additions. I think Venables, it'll take him a few years, like you said, to get it going, whereas Texas can compete right away. And as long as they protect the rivalries, like you said, obviously Texas, Oklahoma, Florida, Georgia, even like Ole Miss, Mississippi State, the Egg Bowl.
Iron Bowl.
What is cool now, too, is you're going to get Texas A&M, and it'll be a conference game. Obviously, LSU, Alabama, Auburn. So as long as they protect a lot of those, games that we've grown accustomed to as being like the rivalry games of the SEC, I'm perfectly fine with it. And I think really it's where college football as a whole is headed, and the SEC kind of got to the forefront of it because they do want to keep themselves as the premier conference in college football. So a good move by them, honestly. Help bring in a lot of money for the conference and keep us the best conference in football, honestly, moving forward, despite what Matt Rule was trying to say in the press conference, talking about the Big Ten is the best and it's the NFL of college football. And, SEC, no knock to you, but we're the best. Just, yeah, no.
Hey, Matt Rule, how about you look at which conference has won the most titles the last 2 decades and which conference has by far the most players drafted in the NFL every season, and then get back to us on that one. Freaking ridiculous, man. But Dunphy has arrived, and he is fired up, man.
That's how we know it's really him and not a bot pretending to be him.
Yep. Our boy John Suggs says Oregon. We're going to be talking about the Big Ten probably next weekend. We will be talking a lot about my boy Dan Lanning and Oregon then. But moving on to our next topic, let me get rid of this real quick. We're going to talk about a couple of freshman quarterbacks. There's 3 I want to highlight in particular, who will all at least get a good amount of playing time. There's one that will not be a starter, but, I've heard is going to at least be in for certain packages. And all 3 of these teams, I think, are promising teams. They're not necessarily contending teams by any means, but they're not terrible either. They could have promising seasons if things go the right way. And we're going to start with the one that I think is the most high profile, which I hate to say it, but is a player for Tennessee, Nico Iamaleava, which I'm never going to say his name again because I know I'll just butcher it every time. I'm just going to call him Nico. So Nico was a former 5-star quarterback. And if you remember, Garth, I remember us actually talking about this when Arch Manning went to Texas, that you were saying actually that you thought he was the best prospect in that class, and that a lot of the hype around Arch was just, the Manning name and whatnot. But he was the number 2 quarterback prospect in the 2023 class, only behind Arch Manning. And he actually played a bit last season. He actually, I believe, started the Citrus Bowl game, which I think was against Iowa, and had a pretty solid game there. But last season, completed 28 of 45 of his passes for 314 passing yards, 2 TDs, no interceptions, and also added 3 TDs on the ground. So, Gardner, what are your expectations for Tennessee this season? There's been a lot of talk about will the defense be improved this year because it's been terrible for so many years. And obviously, you get a 5-star stud redshirt freshman quarterback in there, it raises expectations, a lot. So what do you expect from them this year?
Yeah, I still don't know really fully where I stand with this Tennessee team because there's a lot of unknowns. Everything I've seen, they do expect the defense to be really good for some reason. Not sure if I'm fully sold on that. Pierce gets a lot of hype as being the number 1 defensive player in this year's draft should he enter it. I think really though, ultimately the question is going to be Nico, because if he can play really, really well, it's going to give him a shot. I'm not super, super high on Tennessee as a whole, as a team, and what they're going to do this season, but I am pretty high on Nico because like you mentioned, I did think he was the number 1 quarterback in that class coming out. The numbers were just way better than Arch's. Just obviously with the last name of Manning, that really boosts your prospect stock. So that's most likely why you got the nod there. But the kid's phenomenal, super, super talented, really big arm. He can fit the ball in the tight places. He can make all the throws on the field. So, he's definitely got the talent aspect of it, the arm ability. It's just really how is he going to adapt to being the guy, being the starter for the whole entire season. And also, too, one thing that you can't simulate in practice, you got to go out and do the real thing, is playing on the road in these really, really tough SEC environments. That's my biggest question mark for him, Noah. How well is he going to handle those moments and adapt to that? Because there's certain guys where they're just unfazed, and there's other guys where it just absolutely wrecks him, and we're not going to know until he actually gets in them. But I could see them being kind of middle of the pack this year for the SEC because it is so loaded this year. And obviously most likely making a bowl game. I'm just not so high on them that I think that they're going to compete for the SEC this year or make CFP or anything crazy like that. I think Nico will have a solid year. I got to hold off on great until I see more of him, and they should make a bowl game is kind of where I'm feeling on them this year.
Josh says, hang on, where'd it go? Tennessee offensive line will be key. Also, Brew McCoy says went, and Dunphy says go Tigers. We're going to talk about LSU in a little bit, actually. I got some interesting things to say about LSU this year. But, yeah, I think Tennessee will be decent. I don't think they'll compete for the conference or anything, which I know a lot of Tennessee fans, as my uncle Dr. CFB likes to joke, think that, Nico will win the Heisman and then they'll go 16-0, not even in competition. But I do think they'll be solid. I think they probably are looking at their schedule. They do have a tough out-of-conference game, actually, against NC State in Week 2 at Bank of America Stadium. It says, I guess, neutral site, but, at Bank of America Stadium, I'd actually expect that to kind of be a road game for them. At Oklahoma and at Arkansas, They do kind of luck out, though. Their games against Florida, Alabama, and Kentucky this season are all at Neyland. But then they play Georgia on the road later in the year as well. So it's, kind of a mixed bag of a schedule there. They got my boy Squirrel White at wide receiver, one of my favorite names in all of college football.
That dude, it feels like he's been there 6 years now.
He's so fast, man. Him and Brew McCoy, on the outside will be doing a great job. And then at running back, they got Dylan Sampson. I don't know too much about him, to be honest, but, we'll see what he can do for them. And then defensively, like you said, I mean, they need their defense to be better. It's just been so terrible for the past couple of years, which has really hurt them once they get to the big games. I think Nico's very promising. I think he has a bazooka of an arm. I need to see a bit more of him in actual, games to determine, how good he is at reading defenses and stuff like that, because we've only seen a little bit from him. But I think he's all the potential in the world, man. I do think he could be better than Arch Manning, but, remains to be seen, obviously.
With bowl games, too, no, it's so hard to judge off of because now, unless it's a playoff game, so many people sit out.
Yeah, and that was, I think, that might have actually been why he started the bowl game. I can't remember if it was Joe Milton sat out or if he just got benched. I mean, but I think going from Joe Milton to Nico is going to be a massive upgrade for them. It was a major decline going from Hooker to Milton for them. So that'll be big for him. But next, there's another freshman quarterback I want to talk about. This one I think is probably the least popular, if you will. But I got to say I love this guy because, man, you're an absolute badass when you're out on the field as a quarterback wearing glasses. And this guy is, I don't know what to think of him, but from what I've seen, he's actually looked really good. LaNorris Sellers, who, like I said, man, I mean, look at this. This is just, as a four-eyed geek like myself, you got to love this. He wears it, in pictures. He wears it on the field, practice, everywhere. I mean, what an animal. He's going to have his eyes on success this season. No pun intended, as he's projected to be South Carolina's starting quarterback this season. He had a little bit of playing time this last season. I'm going to get his stats up real quick. I did write him down, even though they're not in the banner. He had 4 passes, but he completed all of them for 86 yards and 2 touchdowns. Granted, that was against Furman, so, it's not exactly great competition. But, South Carolina is kind of a weird one, Garth, because I think the first 2 years under Beamer were really good. They're one of the biggest overachieving teams in the SEC. And then last season, they took a step back. However, I will say, I think Spencer Rattler was a good quarterback. He's not exactly what I would have called an elite quarterback. I think he had, he has as many highs as he has lows. There's a lot of risk, but a lot of reward as well. With Sellers, obviously I haven't seen him play a lot, but, he's a former 3-star quarterback. He was, I think, like top 40 nationally in his class. I don't remember the exact number, but something like that. They got Raheem Sanders in at running back, which I think is massive because that guy was an absolute beast at Arkansas. He knows the SEC very well. They got that Nick Carver at wide receiver, who's the guy in college football 25 that is like 6'5" and has 99 speed, which is just ridiculous. But I'm looking at their depth chart. He's not even projected to be a starter right now. They got Dalvin Campbell, Gage Larvadain, and Jared Brown as projected to be their starters this season. On the defensive side, they got edge rusher Kyle Kennard and defensive end Gilbert Edmond coming in as, I believe, transfers. So, it's tough, but I think South Carolina will be decent. They'll probably make a bowl game, maybe like 6-6, 7-5. I'm going to check their schedule real quick just to see. I know they don't play Georgia this season, which is kind of crazy. It's like the first time in like 30 years that they haven't played Georgia in a season. But they're at Kentucky. They play LSU, but at home. Ole Miss at home, at Alabama, at Oklahoma, versus A&M, at Vanderbilt, versus Missouri, and obviously they end the season at Clemson. It's definitely not an easy schedule, but could they eke out 6-6 potentially? I think it all comes down to Sellers. I think he's the biggest wild card. But from what very little I've seen, I think he has talent. What are your projections for South Carolina this season with, new quarterback coming in, Shane Beamer, 4th year there, kind of, he overachieved a lot at first because they really could not recruit at all. And, they didn't have a great roster. But now there's higher expectations after, the season they had last year. He's got to get a rebound this year.
Yeah, I think this might honestly be the hardest team in the SEC to get a good read on because his whole kind of tenure there so far has been very up and down, very hot and cold. He had that fantastic end of the season 2 years ago where they won like 5 straight games or something crazy. They had that big win over Tennessee when Tennessee was doing really well, given the standards that they've been used to lately. Um, they did lose some to the draft, obviously, this year, and Spencer Rattler and the wide receiver that I can't remember the name of to save my life right now, but he was really, really popular in the interviews because he's got that very Southern twang and draw accent. So brand new quarterback. One thing that you touched on, Noah, is the recruitment's kind of always been the biggest issue for them as a whole, not even just Beamer. They're kind of one of the lower tier recruiting teams in the SEC. And obviously that's just as important these days as having a really good, capable head coach. But they are starting to get better. I pulled up their class. They finished 18th, I think, in the nation, it said. So that's pretty darn good, especially for what they're accustomed to. But the fact that, brand new quarterback, the schedule is not too bad. I could see them kind of in the same boat as Tennessee. I just don't think that their ceiling is quite as high as Tennessee's. Like if Nico can play really well, then their ceiling is higher. But I could realistically see them finishing, right around the middle or just barely into that bottom second half of the SEC this year. Like right around 6 to 8 win mark. And getting into a bowl game. I wouldn't expect them to take like a massive step back and be bad this year, but I also wouldn't expect them to like go out and light the world on fire and have a way better year than most people are expecting out of them. I think it'll be a respectable season. If Shane Beamer can start to stack these really good recruitment classes together, I think that they're going to be on the up and up because I do like him as a coach, honestly, there in South Carolina.
Yeah, I do think he's a good coach, and hopefully for him, last season was kind of a little dip because he did win, I think, 15 games the 2 years before that combined. Beat Clemson as well one of those years. Josh McMurray says, my balls overachieves. I actually think they're kind of underachievers, to be honest, man. I mean, isn't your son is adopted, actually. So, I mean, what have your balls even actually accomplished?
I think it's a very similar situation to Mizzou though, Noah, where they need to be patient with Beamer until it's just totally like time to move on, which I don't think they're anywhere near that right now, especially if he can continue to recruit at a much higher level than what they've seen in recent years.
Well, Garth, I saved your favorite freshman quarterback for last because, I want your insight on this one the most since I have no idea how they're going to deal with this situation. Graham Mertz played very well for Florida last season, and while a lot of people, I think myself included, expected him to be kind of a bridge quarterback, he played more than well enough to warrant a second year as the starter. However, he's going to have to probably look over his shoulder a bit this season, Garth, because they got DJ Lagway coming in, true freshman, 5-star prospect. It's important to note true freshman because the other two guys I mentioned were both redshirt freshmen. This guy's a true freshman. 2024 class was the number 1 quarterback in the entire class and number 3 overall. So very highly rated. I feel like I remember you mentioning they plan to play him a little bit in certain packages, but you're the resident Florida fan, so I want your opinion on it. What's your thoughts on what they're going to do with Mertz and Lagway this season, and just some general thoughts for the Gators overall because they do have a ridiculously tough schedule. It's the toughest rated schedule in the SEC. But I know you're a bit more optimistic than a lot of Florida fans I know. So what's your prediction for this team this year?
Yeah, so first on the Lagway part, not really so much the skill sets of the players, but just the situation as a whole. I think it's very reminiscent of Chris Leak and Tim Tebow, where he came in as a highly touted, hyped up freshman quarterback where he's so good and so talented that you've got to get him in there to get snaps here and there and give him kind of the looks that are really going to be advantageous to his skill set. But I definitely don't expect him to take the starting job throughout this season. I'm really high on Graham Mertz after what he showed last year. I definitely was very skeptical, but willing to give it a chance when we found out that he was going to be headed to Florida. My thing with him was always, he's shown the talent. He's shown that he can, sling the ball around, but he also was very, very turnover prone in his time up there. But he cut way back last year, only had 3 interceptions, and actually watching those 3 interceptions, they weren't even it was like he just aired the ball out and just threw it to the defense. Actually, I believe all 3 of them were tipped off of receivers' hands. So he did a really, really good job of taking care of the ball last year. Obviously, he didn't have the rushing stats because he's not a mobile guy, but one thing that I always like to throw out there is his passing stats solely were almost identical to Jordan Travis, who was a Heisman semifinalist. So he had a really, really good year last year, despite just downright abysmal offensive line play. Outside of Ricky Pearsall and a true freshman, Eugene Wilson, he wasn't exactly surrounded by a ton of talent at wide receiver either. So I think given the circumstances and the stats that he put up, phenomenal year last year. Everything I've heard from the insiders is that this year he's even going to be even better because he's more comfortable. He's the leader of the locker room. He knows the offensive system, like the back of his hand, whereas last year he came in, he had to learn it all rapidly and kind of just thrown into the fire. And I know that him and Lagway have a really good relationship where Lagway's like, hey, I'm the really talented but younger guy. I want to learn as much as possible from Mertz in this first year so that when I do take over, I'm going to be ready to go. But really the biggest thing for me, Noah, why I'm a little bit more optimistic despite the schedule being really, really absolutely brutal, is just the fact that this team actually finally has some depth now and SEC caliber players. When Billy got here, the roster was absolutely depleted because Dan Mullen ran a lot of guys out of town to the transfer portal, or the good players that he did have went on to the NFL, and he didn't like to recruit, so he wasn't replenishing that pool of talent. So Billy was handed a really bad situation, whereas he's been able to string together some really good recruitment classes, some really good transfer portal classes. And, kind of the best way to put it is before it was hey, Florida has one really good defensive end, but outside of that, they have nothing. And if that one dude gets injured, all of a sudden, we're screwed. Whereas this year, it's holy crap, they have 3 or 4 guys at each position that could all realistically start. A lot more experience. Last year, we had to play a ton of freshmen and sophomores that have all returned. Went out and got a really, really good class of transfer portal guys. Really good wide receiver out of Arizona State and Elijah Badger, who's put up some good numbers out there. Asa Turner, who was the starting safety for Washington the past few seasons. Revamped the staff, got rid of a lot of guys who are underperforming there. So, just the fact, I think that the roster is more talented, way more depth in the case if somebody does get injured, or just to keep guys fresh, honestly, because the SEC is absolutely brutal with how physical and how big and strong these guys are. And one thing, too, that goes way under the radar for most college football fans is a much, much more competent and better strength and conditioning staff was brought in. I've been watching the videos of these guys. They're like, hey, we're actually, lifting weights and trying to get stronger now instead of just running laps around the facility, like we're preparing for a marathon. So just a lot of things that I've seen, Noah, behind the scenes that show that stuff is starting to move in the right direction where Florida can become a winning program again instead of just being absolutely abysmal each year and missing bowl games.
Josh says 7-5 or 8-4. I'm
hoping that's kind of realistically where I see them finishing is 7-5 to 8-4 because the schedule is so tough this year.
And Josh says Thurton Grantham now.
Yeah, thank God that guy's gone.
But Garth, I agree with a lot of what you said, except I did notice one concerning thing with you, which is every time you mentioned potential records for the team, you kept flipping it. So instead of 7-5 or 8-4, I think you meant to say 4-8 or 5-7. Because that's around where I am. But in all seriousness, I'm looking at the schedule right now, and
the good news, though, with their schedule is it starts off very, very manageable to where if they actually play really well and get on a hot streak, they can give themselves, kind of a buffer for how tough that second half of the schedule becomes.
All right, Garth, you always beg for me to give you the unbiased Noah when it comes to Florida, so I'm about to give it to you for about the next 2 minutes, and then we're going back to 6 more months of straight trolling. So looking at the schedule, there's only 2 games on it that I look at, and I say Florida probably there's like a more than 80% chance Florida loses, which is the Georgia game and at Texas. I think those are 2 games that they're very more than likely going to lose. And then the rest of the schedule, I think there's a ton of 50-50 games, which kind of decide your season. And that's where Florida, I think, has come short the first 2 years under Billy Napier. They've had a lot of those 50-50 games that they haven't been able to win. They lose at the very end, or they lose against a team like a Vanderbilt that you would never expect them to lose to.
Also, too, sorry to interrupt you, but one thing, home record under Billy has been really good. Road record, absolutely friggin' abysmal. So that's one thing that they have to improve on, regardless of who the opponent is.
And they do have some tough road games. They have Texas, which I already mentioned, at Tennessee, and at Florida State. But I think the vast majority of their schedule is a lot of 50-50 games against teams that are tough, but teams that if Florida plays their best game, I think they could have a shot at beating, which are Miami, which is at home, A&M, which is also at home, at Mississippi State, which Mississippi State is, in my opinion, one of the worst SEC teams this season. UCF, Kentucky, which is at home. I already mentioned Tennessee and Texas. I think they lose at Georgia. LSU, which I think LSU, in my opinion, is a better team than Florida. But again, at home, at the Swamp. Same with Ole Miss. I think is a better team than Florida. But at home, at the Swamp, you can never count it out. Like you said, they're amazing at home, but terrible on the road. And they close at Florida State. I mean, that's what I just listed 6, 7. I just listed 9 games, in my opinion, that are basically 50-50 games. So if they win 5 of those, they make a bowl game. If they don't, they could go 4-8. I mean, I think there's a lot of variation. Gut feeling for me, I think of those games, I think they can beat Miami. I think they beat Mississippi State and probably beat UCF. At Tennessee, I mean, they did beat them last year. Granted, that was at home. And the year before that, it was very close. I'd probably say Tennessee wins that one. They probably beat Kentucky because it's at home. If it was on the road, I'd probably pick Kentucky. LSU, probably got to give it to LSU. And then Ole Miss, I don't know, man. I could see Ole Miss winning that one because they do stub Jackson Dart. But I think there's more.
It's a little bit of a revenge game, actually, because Princely, Umenmi Ellen, really one of those tongue twister last names, transferred there to play defensive end for them after he'd been at Florida the past 3 or 4 years. And he was talking a load of trash against the Florida program. So hopefully we can get that one to kind of stick it to the man there.
But yeah, I don't know, man. I think there's a lot of I think 4-8 to 8-4, I think is a lot of variability. I don't think they'll be absolute trash. I don't think they'll be competing for the SEC. I think they'll be, I don't know if mediocre is the right word, but middling. I think a wild card is how good Lagway is and how good he comes in. And if, Mertz, God forbid, gets injured, or if he has a down year and then maybe Lagway gets some more playing time than projected, what could that do as well? They do have some superstars on defense, though. I really like, let me get up the roster real quick. But one guy I really like in the secondary is Jason Marshall. I think he's really good. They got some good transfers in as well. LJ McCray, I think, is a guy to keep an eye on. Is kind of an X factor for them. And then the other side, they still have Montrell Johnson, Eugene Wilson that you mentioned. I think he's really good. Marcus Burke. And then their special teams is really good as well. Really solid special teams. So probably, I don't know. I'd say play it safe, anywhere from 5-7 to 7-5. They got so many 50-50 games. Josh says, I wish you could play UF at the Swamp. I don't, because that would be a very tough place to play. I think that would be cooler than the neutral site thing. Again, that's something I'm always 50-50 on. I love the neutral site game, but I understand why people would want to go to the home and home format like a lot of other games are. David says 3-9 and Tennessee ain't shit. There you go. there you have it. There's the verdict from the Dunfinator. But yeah, so that's all the unbiased you're getting. Now it's back to Florida's going 3-9.
I think, no, honestly, for me, the two biggest question marks is everything I've seen shows that the defense is going to be better, but how much better? Because as we both know, it's been absolutely atrocious for what feels like forever now. And two, how improved or not can the offensive line be? Because that was kind of the other weak link of last year's roster. Both the offensive line, which actually was uncommon because offensive line play has been pretty good for the past 4 or 5 years, but the defense absolutely abysmal, has got to improve. And the offensive line did take a massive drop last season. They've got to bounce back and get back to more of what we're used to seeing there.
Yeah, the offensive line is abysmal. I'm glad you reminded me of that because I kind of forgot to mention that. Graham Mertz, I thought, was really good last year when he had time, but there are a lot of times where he was just getting absolutely popped. And like you said, I think most of the interceptions he threw weren't his fault. There was some uncertainty in the wide receiver position. I think losing Ricky Pearsall will be interesting to see how they fill that void. Same with Trevor Etienne. They still have Johnson, but they're going to need Trayon Webb to kind of step up as that second option for them as well. So, it's tough to predict. I think if they go 7-5, they'd be really happy with that with the schedule. It's not going to be that tough every year. And they need to make a bowl game because I think if Napier doesn't make a bowl game this season, that's now 3 years where they haven't. And, you can understand it at first because it's still, mainly a Mullen roster. But when you're 3 years in and most of the recruits are your guys at that point, you need to get some results, whether it's fair or not. I personally do like Napier. I think he's doing a lot of right things behind the scenes with the infrastructure and stuff. But at the same time, I'm not going to lie, I have seen some head-scratching play calls as well on the field, calling screens and stuff on 3rd and 13 and, calling these deep routes in the pass game that take forever to progress when your offensive line is crap. There is some head-scratching stuff. So I wouldn't say he's on the hot seat yet, but if they start losing again, man, it could be an interesting situation there.
I agree with you there. No, I think as long as we make a bowl game, his job should be safe because it shows at least some progression and plus the stuff behind the scenes improving. But if we miss a bowl game, as much as they want to give him the benefit of the doubt, it's just that the expectations are too high to be doing stuff like that 3-4 years in a row. So that's where it'll get a little bit hairy and where I could see him end up losing his job if we don't make the bowl game.
Well, Garth, from a coach that may be on the hot seat to a coach who was on the hot seat and got replaced, we're going to talk about Mike Elko and Texas A&M. So Mike Elko was the head coach of the Duke Blue Devils the last 2 seasons, led them to a 16-9 record, back-to-back bowl games. He won the first one, and he did not coach the second one, but Duke did win that one as well, which for a team like Duke, this isn't the basketball team, we're talking about the football team, is pretty ridiculous. Jimbo got fired from A&M. It was an absolute disaster. All those number 1 recruiting classes to go like 5-7 or something, it was just a complete mess from the start. Had to pay that massive buyout of his contract as well. But they get in Mike Elko to come in, and I'm looking at their depth chart here real quick. So they still got Connor Weigman at quarterback, which kind of 50-50 on him. There are plays I see from where he looks really good, and there are other times where it looks like he's never thrown a football in his career. They got Lebby Moss in the backfield. They got Moose Muhammad III as their slot guy. I really like him. Same with Noah Thomas. Defense, Shamar Turner, I think, is a stud. Tyreek Chappell as well, I think, is the guy I really like. And if I look at their schedule real quick, they start the season with Notre Dame, which is a tough out-of-conference game, but it is at Kyle Field, at Florida versus Arkansas, Missouri, at Mississippi State, LSU, at South Carolina, at Auburn, and then the end with Texas. I'd say it's kind of a middle-of-the-road schedule. There are some tough games in there, but then there are some that I think are a little more manageable. I think Mike Elko's got a lot of work to do, man. I think Jimbo Fisher, ultimately, even though he could recruit, did more harm than good over his A&M tenure. I think that Elko is a good coach, but he's got a lot to fix there. I don't think they'll be even close to compete for the SEC, which, is wild considering 2 years ago, that season where, or 2021, I think it was, a season where A&M beat Alabama. They had a shot at winning the SEC West, genuinely had a big shot to do it. And then they just choked at the very end, lost like 3 straight games in conference, completely fell off. And since then, they haven't even really been even close. I think they'll be an okay team, maybe a 7-5 team. I don't think they'll be competing just yet. They still get good recruits. Elko is, a very smart coach on the field as well. So I think they'll be respectable. I think he'll get going in the right direction, but just for year one, I don't think they're even a top 5 probably SEC team. They're probably more 8 to 10 range. They're obviously way better than teams like, Vanderbilt or Arkansas, Auburn, stuff like that, in my opinion. But I think they're just kind of mediocre, in my opinion. But I do think it's a good hire. I think moving on from Jimbo Fisher was the right move. How they did it, probably not. You don't want to, buy out the, 10 years, $100 million contract. That's not ideal. But I think it was time for him to go. I think Jimbo's kind of past it, unfortunately. I mean, he hasn't won since 2013, and he just kept taking that program further away from where they wanted to be instead of closer. But I think it'll be a bit of a rebuild for them, kind of a retooling year for them this year. And then maybe, 3 or 4 years from now, they might be back, as one of the top teams. But the SEC is only getting tougher. So I expect them to kind of be, kind of that 6-6, 7-5 range this year. What's your read on, first of all, the move, Mike Elko going to A&M, and then just, general expectations for the team this year?
Yeah, I think it was the right move. Like you said, no, to move on from Jimbo. It just, as much as it sucked to cough up that much money to have to buy him out, at the same time, things weren't getting better. And really the only thing to be excited about was that they were spending loads of money in NIL to land really good recruitment classes. But at the end of the day, you still weren't winning football games. So, it goes hand in hand. Yeah, it's awesome to recruit really, really well and get all those 4- and 5-star guys and be hyped about them. But if you're not winning games, then, that kind of goes right back out the window as you're going through the football season. Really big fan of Elko. I think he's, one of the better coaches in college football, especially with what he was able to do at Duke. He's a really experienced guy, kind of been a little bit everywhere. He brings in a good staff there to Texas A&M, made some pretty good hires. They did lose quite a bit to the transfer portal. I know that off the top of my head, they lost LT Overton, which was like a really, really hyped defensive line guy that went there to Ole Miss, actually. I believe they lost like a receiver and their starting safety. They lost quite a bit regardless. But, I think long-term they're going to be good this year. Probably a little bit of, figuring out the roster still. Who are your guys? Who are your not? You still don't have fully kind of your guys that fit your system there, obviously, being in year one. I will say one thing is the schedule really isn't too bad. Obviously, like you said, Noah, Notre Dame at home, tough opponent. Elko does have experience against them. He'll be up against his former quarterback as well. So he kind of has, a little bit of inside knowledge against that tough team that he's going to be up against in week one. It is at home. So I could see that kind of being like a 60-40 type of odds to win that one. McNeese State at home, they should kill them. At Florida, kind of a toss-up game. Bowling Green at home should obviously win that one. Arkansas at home should win that one, in my opinion. Missouri, they most likely lose that one. At Mississippi State, very well could win that one. LSU, they probably lose that one. At South Carolina, really tough place to play. They probably drop that one on the road. New Mexico State should win that one. Auburn, another one of those toss-up games because I do believe it's on the road. And then they finish with Texas, which I would have to go Texas in that one. So, I could see them probably making a bowl game and winning, I would say, 6 games on the low end to 8 games on the high end if things really, really go their way and they win a couple of those toss-up games.
Next one, we're going to talk about another first-year head coach who is, a decent track record as an OC, actually. The past 5 years, he has been an OC for UCF in 2019. He spent 2 years with Ole Miss with, I believe, Matt Corral. And then the last 2 years, he's actually been with Oklahoma. So Dylan Gabriel last season. He was the OC/quarterback coach, which is Jeff Lebby, taking over as head coach of the Mississippi State Bulldogs, which is a program that has, rapidly fallen off the last few years, in my opinion. They still got that veer and shoot kind of program. Some of the Mike Leach influence is still there, but they've been really struggling to kind of replicate this success. Will Rogers, who was a beast quarterback, in my opinion, for them, definitely one of the better quarterbacks in the SEC, has transferred. He is now going to Washington, which means that former Baylor quarterback Blake Shapen is their quarterback this year, projected to be their starter. I think Shapen's all right. I don't think he's amazing. I remember him coming in that championship game against Oklahoma State, and I thought he looked really good. And since then, it's kind of been a mixed bag. I think he got benched a few times here or there as well, kind of battling for playing time. I don't think he's terrible. I don't think he's great. I think he's just kind of a middle-of-the-road quarterback, which when you look at the rest of the quarterbacks in the SEC, you got Beck, Ewers, and Milroe, who were the All-American quarterbacks. They're all beasts. You got Jackson Dart at Ole Miss. He's a stud. You got Brady Cook. He's very good. You got the promising freshman in Nico, Sellers, and potentially Lagway. You got Mertz there as well. KG Jefferson is gone, so that's one that isn't there. You got Brock Vandergriff at Kentucky, UGA transfer. So, there's a lot of competition, and I don't even think Blake Shapen would be a top 10 quarterback in the SEC, which I hate to say because I kind of like him. But there's just so many good quarterbacks. I don't quite think he stacks up. Now, I'm going to take a look real quick at their schedule before I kind of give my verdict on what I think they do this year. But their out-of-conference games are easy. Their toughest one is Toledo in Week 3. But Florida, at Texas, at Georgia, A&M, Arkansas, at Tennessee, Missouri, at Ole Miss. They lose at Ole Miss. They lose at Tennessee. They lose to Missouri. Arkansas is honestly a 50-50 game. I think both those teams struggle this year. A&M at home, 50-50. They lose at Georgia. They lose at Texas. They probably lose against Florida. I hate to say it. I think they go 4-8, 5-7, something like that. I think they're going to be one of the bottom teams in the SEC. Now, of course, now that I've said that, with how some of my predictions gone, they're going to go 8-4 and be one of the biggest overachievers. But just on paper, I don't see it. Even though I think Lebby, he has a solid background, I think he has a really good offensive pedigree. Blake Shapen, he's a senior transfer. I don't think there's a lot there you're building for the future. I don't know if they have any younger quarterbacks. They have Chris Parson, redshirt freshman, Michael Van Buren, true freshman. I don't know a lot about these guys. Maybe they could be one of the future guys. But just for this season with Blake Shapen, I don't think they're going to be very good personally. I think their schedule has some tough games on it. I'm looking at the roster, and I just don't really see an impact player that sticks out, whereas, a lot of other teams, there's one that sticks out. So, yeah, unfortunately, I think it's going to be kind of a rough year for Mississippi State. What are your thoughts on, this hire for the Bulldogs and your projections for them this season?
Yeah, so I think the hire, at least offensively speaking, because of where Lebby's been and what he's done, and being an offensive-minded guy, is probably going to be a good choice for them in the long run. How he fares overall, especially in the SEC, I don't know. It could work out really well. It could be an absolute dumpster fire for them. You don't really know until you see how it pans out. But like you said, they don't really have any household name, star power, really talented, NFL draft caliber type of players on this roster. Shapen, not huge on him, just he showed us glimpses there when he took over in that Big 12 title game. And then he's also had a lot of struggles where he's been in and out of the lineup, benched, looked really, really bad at times. Change of scenery sometimes can reinvigorate a guy, but I don't know if it's going to happen at Mississippi State just because he's not really surrounded by tons of talent. So, this is one of the teams in the SEC I'm definitely on the lower end of the spectrum with. I think Lebby's going to do all right because Mississippi State standards are not really high. It's not like they're going to fire him if he misses a bowl game year one. I think he's going to get the time there to try and get the type of players that he wants, build up the offensive firepower, because I definitely don't see him becoming a really well-rounded team under him or having dominant defense, but I could definitely see them having good quarterback play and having a good offense once he starts getting some of his guys in there. As far as how they do this year, let's see here. Eastern Kentucky at home, they should win that one. At Arizona State, that's kind of a 50-50 game for me. If that were at Arizona, the other team in the state, I would say they definitely lose it because they're actually kind of under the radar, a really good team as of late. Toledo at home, they should win that one. At Florida, they probably lose that one. Texas, they should lose that one. Georgia, they should lose that one. A&M, slight edge to A&M there. Arkansas, they should probably win because I'm not super high on them either. UMass, they should win that one. Tennessee, they lose. Mizzou, they should lose. And Ole Miss, they should lose. So I'm kind of right around, low end 4 wins for them, high end 6, and they just sneak into a bowl game. But I really feel like 4 to 5 is going to be where they're at. They should win those games that they really should win, but I don't see them getting the benefit of the doubt in any of those toss-up games. And definitely just, they're outmatched completely in those games that I see them losing.
Moving on to our next one, I kind of want to first of all, I'm going to put up a graphic kind of transition. So these are the SEC Media Days projections that, people voted on or whatever. And as we look at this, we see that, there's a clear top 3 with Georgia, Texas, and Alabama. Most have Georgia and Texas in the championship game with Georgia winning. Although there are some weird votes. So Alabama gets some as well. But I want to know who are the people that voted for Vanderbilt and South Carolina. I don't know if those were just troll votes or if they actually genuinely mean that. But it's kind of crazy that Vanderbilt has 2 first place votes when they're projected overall to finish last. But Mississippi State, who we were just mentioning, is 15, Arkansas 14, South Carolina 13, Florida 12, Kentucky 11, Auburn 10, A&M 9, Oklahoma 8, Tennessee 7, Missouri 6, LSU 5, Ole Miss 4, and the top 3 who I already mentioned. But for our next topic, I want to talk about 4 through 6, Ole Miss, LSU, and Missouri. Kind of that second tier, if you will, the SEC guard, who everyone agrees are solid teams, really good teams. 2 of them have quarterbacks returning with Jackson Dart for Ole Miss and Brady Cook for Missouri. And then LSU has Garrett Nussmeier coming in, who Jaden Daniels was amazing, won the Heisman Trophy. But I will say, I've seen Nussmeier play. He came in that SC Championship game in 2022 when Daniels left the game, and he looks really good. He has a rocket arm. He's accurate. So if that's more of what LSU expects this season and he delivers that, they'll still be really good. But again, they kind of, they're not held in that same regard as the top 3, Georgia, Texas, and Alabama are. So, Gordon, in your opinion, what's your brief takeaways from, each of these 3 teams? And if you had to pick one to kind of be, that surprise team that maybe sneaks in the title game or, is right there competing for it, which one would you pick?
Yeah, so I think all 3 of these teams are going to be good this year again. They're going to be in the mix. My only issue with these teams is, unlike a Georgia or a Texas or even Alabama, honestly, I have huge question marks for all 3 of these. Ole Miss, obviously, is Lane Kiffin, and the fact that as good as he's been, he can't win the big games. And they do have a really good roster on paper, but it's also a lot of transfer portal guys, which we saw how well that worked out for Florida State this past season. LSU, I do like Nussmeier, and I know that he's very highly regarded. Everything I see on him is that this is going to be the next dude, and they're not going to skip a beat with Daniels being gone. But they did still lose 2 really good receivers to the draft, as well as a quarterback that's going to be hard to replace, because he didn't just do it with his arm, he did it with his legs too. His stats were absolutely insane last year, and a really, really big part of why they did as good as they did. And then Missouri, they do return some key guys, like the quarterback and wide receiver Luther Burden, but they also lost a lot to the draft as well. They also lost their defensive coordinator, Noah, which could be huge. We'll have to wait and see, because sometimes guys come in and fill the shoes really well, and it's like they don't skip a beat. And other times it's like, hey, this team just went from being one of the best defensive units in SEC to what the heck are they doing out there? But if I had to pick one out of these three, I feel like, I don't know, I'm a little bit lower on Missouri than most people just because, one, I think they did overachieve a little bit last year, paired with the fact that they lost some really key guys like Schrader. That dude was, he wasn't going out and win the Heisman or anything last year. He wasn't the most talented guy, but he really was like the heart and soul of that offense. He was the guy who was just going to, leave it all out there on the field every single game. And he kind of brought the guys together, and losing the defensive coordinator. So I think they're out of those three, slightly in third place. It's kind of really between Ole Miss and LSU for me because I do like Nussmeier. I think LSU is still going to be very good. Obviously, Brian Kelly, as much as we like to troll that he can't ever win the big game, he still is a very good college football coach who's seen it all, been there, done it. So he's got the experience under his belt. Really, I think Noah also too with LSU is their defense has got to improve, because that's another team kind of like my Florida Gators where we're used to seeing them have really, really good defenses. But these past few years, it's been pretty much non-existent. It feels like every single game they're in is a shootout, barn burner type of game. I feel like just because I can't fully trust Lane Kiffin and the fact that most of their roster is like these transfer portal mercenary type of players versus being built through the recruitment process, I think I'm going to give a very slight edge to LSU. And of those three specifically, probably finish in order of LSU, Ole Miss, Missouri.
Well, Garth, funny enough, I actually completely agree with you. I was going to pick LSU as well. I think as long as Garrett Nussmeier, kind of settles in that offense. I mean, I don't expect him to repeat what Jaden Daniels did, or Jaden Daniels, excuse me. But if he just, does solid, shows that arm strength and is able to lead that offense confidently, if their line improves as well, I think they could improve a bit there, and obviously defensively. But they still got some studs, man. I like Kyron Lacey at wide receiver, and they have some, good running back core as well. I think with Missouri, it's kind of tough because other than Luther Burdt, I think he's, their X factor player. He's probably the best wide receiver in the SEC, and I do like Theo Weiss as well. But I don't know. Like you said, I do think they overachieved last year. They were amazing. Drinkwitz, did a great job. They beat Ohio State in that bowl game as well. But them and Ole Miss have some tough games this year. And while LSU does have a tough schedule as well, I'm looking at it right now, and I think their toughest games are at home. Versus Oklahoma, versus Vanderbilt, at Florida, versus Bama, at A&M, at Arkansas, versus Ole Miss. They do play UCLA out of conference, which is interesting. But again, that one is at home, at South Carolina, versus USC. All their toughest games are at Baton Rouge, which we know Death Valley is a crazy place.
Yep.
So, it is tough. I think both these teams all three of these teams are very similar. But if I have to pick, even though I'm not a big fan of Brian Kelly, I'm going to pick LSU in this one. It's close. I think all these teams are really good, but I think LSU has the highest potential if Nussmeier is able to keep that offense flying high. Not quite as good. I don't think they'll be as good because Jaden Daniels, that's a once-in-a-lifetime kind of guy to do what he did last year.
Also keep an eye on Harold Perkins on the defensive side of the ball.
Yes, he had a down year last year.
Defensive players in the SEC, just not as talked about as much lately because, like you said, no, he did have a down year, but I think the whole defense as a whole had a down year last year.
So we're just gonna briefly go over these last teams because I do want to at least talk about every team a little, but these teams are teams that I'm not too sure about for one reason or another. Either they have, skills positions deficiencies, their head coach is kind of middling, they can't recruit as well as the other SEC schools, or they're just simply not good enough. And we're going to start with Auburn first. So second year with Hugh Freeze. Peyton Thorne at quarterback really struggled last season coming in from Michigan State. But they do have Jarquez Hunter at running back, who's an absolute beast. First-team SEC All-American running back. I don't know what to think about Auburn. I think they'll be all right. But, again, I mean, I'm looking at the roster real quick. I like Cam Coleman at wide receiver. I think he's an impact player. They didn't get in Keandre Lambert-Smith, transfer in Penn State. I really liked him at Penn State. But I don't know. I just don't think they have enough talent. I'm going to look at their schedule real quick to see exactly who they're playing this year and, which games are at home. But their out of conference is really easy. They have Alabama A&M, California, New Mexico, and Louisiana Monroe. But conference-wise, Arkansas and Oklahoma, which are both at home, at Georgia, at Missouri, I'd expect them to lose both of those. At Kentucky, probably lose that as well. Vanderbilt at home, which they win. Texas A&M at home, which they might win. And at Alabama, which I would expect them to lose, but again, it's the Iron Bowl, so basically anything goes. I think decent team, maybe 6-6, 7-5. I don't think they'll be very good, mainly because I'm not sure what the hell happened to Peyton Thorne. I thought he was really good at Michigan State. And then last year, it was like they could not pass the ball at all, Garth. It got so bad, they put in that, what was his name, Robbie Ashford, to basically be a running quarterback over and over and over again because they just had no passing game. They completely rely on the running game. If Peyton Thorne doesn't take a big step this year, I think it'll just be more of the same. I mean, Jarquez Hunter is a stud. But if you can't pass the ball, what are they going to do? They're just going to put 8 in the box and try and slow the running game down, and then they have no offense at all. They have promising wide receivers, but it doesn't matter at all if the quarterback doesn't get in the football this year. So Peyton Thorne needs to take a big step because if it's more of the same like last year, this offense isn't going to do anything, man. I think he'll be a little bit better because we did see him do well at Michigan State. I don't understand why he was so bad last season. I don't know if it was something from Hugh Freeze, if he was struggling to adjust to SEC play. I don't know what it was, but it was just like night and day. So I think they'll be all right, but major question mark at quarterback, which is the most important position in football. So I'm a little reserved about expectations with them. What are your thoughts on Auburn this season, Garth?
Yeah, after last year being so high on the Peyton Thorne going there from Michigan State, I thought that was going to be a really, really good pickup for them. Did not pan out, like you mentioned. I couldn't name a guy on their defense. That's kind of concerning for me. Because as we all know, SEC, you either need to have a offense that is so good that you can just outscore your opponent in an absolute shootout, or you got to be able to play defense. I don't expect them to play really good defense this year. Maybe, here and there at home, they might have stints, but overall, they actually do have some really good offensive skill players. It's just a matter of, are they going to be able to take advantage of it and, do something with it, or is it going to be another year of Hugh Freeze and Peyton Thorne and that whole offensive system just struggle busting it the whole season? Last year, I would have given the benefit of the doubt. This year, I'm not going to do the same until they prove me wrong. I don't know. I don't think they'll have a downright terrible year. I think they'll win some of those games that they should win, like a Louisiana Monroe. But I would say like 4 to 6 wins is kind of where I've got them at, finishing towards the bottom of the SEC. Just not sold on Peyton Thorne, not sold on Hugh Freeze at all, as much as I like to joke about him and troll it up and all that good stuff for what we all know he's done in the past. But this is not a team that I would put a lot of stock into, Noah. I will say they've done decent in the transfer portal so far, and they've done pretty well recruiting. So who knows, maybe in a few years' time, they might start getting back to some of those better Auburn teams we've seen in the past. But for this season specifically, not putting stock into this team. Probably a rough year for the fans there. And Jordan O'Hare, they won't be doing their good old swag surfing as they've got accustomed to being known for in the stands. Or if they will, it won't be full capacity sold out and a ranked team.
This next team, Garth, is a very weird one. So they have the longest serving SEC head coach. Yep. They have been overall pretty solid the past, I'd say, 6 or 7 years after kind of being a doormat for so many years. But then the last 2 years after their remarkable season in 2021, where they went 10-3, they've gone 7-6, and they lost their bowl game to Clemson last year. And the year before that, they got shut out 21-0 against Iowa. Kentucky is a strange team to me because I think a lot of their success is going to come down to, transfers that are new to the team rather than returning guys. They do have wide receivers I like. I think Barry and Brown and Dane Key are two really good guys that they have there. But I think, funny enough, Garth, I'm not just saying this because I'm a Georgia fan. I think their season is going to come down entirely to two transfers from Georgia, one on offense and one on defense. And the first one, Brock Vandegrift at quarterback, very talented guy, very highly touted prospect. Obviously, was a backup because there was just no room for him to play. I'm surprised he waited this long to transfer. I thought he would have transferred a year or two ago. I was happy he didn't, but I mean, it was going to happen at some point. I think he's a very good player, but he has barely played at all other than spring games and maybe coming in and cleanup/garbage time. He's an X factor there. We don't know. We haven't seen him play a lot, but I do know he's very talented, and I've liked the very little I've seen from him. So I think he'll be an impact player. And the other side, Jamon Dumas-Johnson, who was very good when he played, but then last season he got injured about halfway through the year. And then it seemed like his injury diagnosis just kept getting pushed back week after week after week. And I don't know if it was, I don't know how to say this the right way without essentially insinuating he quit on the team. But I don't know if he was motivated to come back to the team very fast, if there was some fallout with Kirby Smart. But from what I heard from my uncle, who's he's a biologist, he knows anatomy and stuff like that. From the injury diagnosis he got, it seemed like there was no logical reason why he was out as long as he was. And then after the season, what happens? He enters the transfer portal, and it's just like, did something actually happen there? Because he's a very talented player. He is good enough to start at UGA, in my opinion. But then he transfers out after that injury, and he never comes back, and that's the end of it. So I think he'll be an impact player with Kentucky. But again, I don't know if they have quite the top-level talent to compete with the rest of the SEC. I'm looking at their schedule right now, versus South Carolina, versus Georgia, at Ole Miss. They could win maybe South Carolina. I think they lose the other two. They beat Vanderbilt at home. I think they lose to Florida on the road. Auburn at home is a 50-50. That could go either way. At Tennessee, I think they lose. At Texas, they lose. Another team I think is kind of, around 500. Maybe a 7-5 season. I think it all comes down to Vandegrift, who hasn't really played but is very talented. I think the stagnation/decline is going to kind of continue for them. I don't know if it's kind of crazy that Mark Stoops has been there for 12 years and he's the longest serving head coach. He's had a lot of brilliance there. I think he's a very good head coach. But at some point, man, with all these big teams, now you got two more coming into it. Can Kentucky compete to get those classes and transfers in to compete for the SEC? Will they ever win 10 games again? I don't know. I don't think it's happening this season, though. I think it'll kind of be more of the same for them. What's your read on Kentucky this year?
Yeah, so first of all, it feels weird that Mark Stoops has already been there that long. Secondly, my biggest thing with him, absolutely respect the crap out of him, love him for what he's done there at Kentucky. He can recruit the line of scrimmage really, really well. Excuse me. It seems like he always has really good offensive line play, really good defensive line play, and even like linebackers and secondary. But my biggest issue with him is him and the staff as a whole cannot recruit really high-level skill players, quarterbacks, wide receivers, tight ends, even running backs. I'm pretty sure Ray Davis actually was a transfer, if my memory's serving me correctly tonight. And it seems like every single year it's a new quarterback out of the transfer portal for them. And luckily for them so far, for the most part, it's worked. I wouldn't say that they've had like crazy elite quarterback play where it's like a home run land out of the portal, but they've gotten good enough play to where it helps them win games and not cost them games. And I think that's really killing them, because if you look at the teams that have been at the top, obviously Georgia and Alabama specifically, but even like LSU, they've always been able to recruit skilled players these past 5-6 years really, really well. Seems like they always have like, an elite wide receiver core, elite running back room, household names on the offensive side of the ball. You just don't have that with Kentucky. And I think that's kind of what kills them, because as important as it is to have really good offensive and defensive line, if you can't score, if you can't generate turnovers, then it kind of costs you at the same time. But like you said, no, I think probably right around 7-5 because they do have some very manageable games looking at their schedule here. Southern Miss should win that. Ohio Bobcats, the real school there in Ohio, they should win that one. Vanderbilt, I would have them winning that one. Murray State, a really interesting one on their schedule that jumps out at me, Noah, is Louisville, because that's a big-time rivalry game that does not get played very much in football. And actually, Louisville has been pretty good for years now, but lately, the past 2 or 3 years, they've kind of flown under the radar for having really good competitive football teams, while their basketball program has been massively on the decline. And honestly, if Florida State's defense didn't command that ACC title game last season, there's a very good chance that they could have pulled off that ACC championship as well. So that's one that I'll really be interested in watching. But yeah, I would be right around the same ballpark as you know on that one. 6-7 wins right in there for them this year.
Our boy Garrett coming in with some comments. He says Ball State to the Natty this year, led by the stud Caden Samonza. Good old freshman quarterback, back-to-back Heisman Trophy winner. If you know, you know. And I'll give you the real school in Ohio. I assume the Ohio Bobcats. But moving on, we got the final two teams. The teams projected to be the worst in the SEC. We'll start with the one projected to be the second worst, which is Arkansas, with my man Sam Pittman at head coach. It's crazy to think this is already Sam Pittman's 5th year as head coach, but he's kind of sitting on a hot seat. The last 2 years have kind of not been as good as they were before. KJ Jefferson transferred out. He went to your favorite team, the UCF Golden Knights. And the schedule is tough, man.
Raheem Sanders, as well, as you mentioned earlier in the show.
Yep, he went to South Carolina. So at Auburn versus A&M versus Tennessee versus LSU, at Mississippi State versus Ole Miss versus Texas, at Missouri is their conference schedule. They lose at Missouri. They lose to Texas. They lose to Ole Miss. Mississippi State is 50-50. They lose to LSU. They lose to Tennessee. A&M is 50-50. At Auburn, talent-wise, it's similar, but it's a very tough road game. They probably lose that. So I think you're looking at like 2-6, maybe 3-5 in the SEC. And I'm looking at the roster, and I got to be honest. Taylor Green at quarterback, I believe he transferred in from Boise. He had 11 touchdowns and 9 interceptions last season. Doesn't exactly inspire me with confidence. Impact players, they got 3 of their 5 linemen this year are transfers coming in, so maybe that could help them there. Defensively, I like Landon Jackson, and they actually got in Danico Slaughter in the secondary, transfer from Tennessee. But honestly, man, another team, again, I think their schedule's really tough. And even though I love Sam Pittman, he's a great offensive line coach, and maybe they'll have better line play with those transfers coming in this season. I just don't think they have top-end talent. I mean, their quarterback and running back, like you said, transferred out, and I'm not exactly blown away by the replacements for those positions, to say the least. And their schedule is tough. They have a lot of tough games. So another team that I think 5-7, probably something like that. Maybe if they're lucky, 6-6 in a bowl game. But realistically, I think it's more likely they have a losing record this year.
Yeah, this is a team I'm not very high on for a lot of the same reasons you mentioned. Also, another thing that I don't love with this team, as much as I love the memes and to joke about it, bringing back Petrino for offensive coordinator, that would have been a good hire like 10 years ago. I think This was more so. They weren't exactly going for like the best possible hire they could have made. I think this was more so a, hey man, any chance that you're available to come back and help us? Because at this rate, we need any help that we could possibly get. But yeah, I'm not very high on this team. The talent gap to the rest of the team in the SEC is huge. When you got all these guys transferring in, trying to be your bona fide starters, that's never a good thing. You want to be supplementing an already good roster with the portal, not relying on it totally. Don't like the quarterback transfer, and I'm nothing against him. Just when you're going from KJ Jefferson, it seems like he's been the staple of that team for what felt like forever at this rate. And Raheem Sanders as well. That dude was a stud. Love him. Hopefully he has a good year at SC. Really big fan of him. I just think it's too little too late. I feel like when they first started to feel the ship slipping away is when they should have started making massive moves. And now they've waited too long, and they kind of got stuck of, well, there's nobody really available for us to be able to get that's going to help us save this sinking ship. So really big fan of Pittman. I think he's a great coach, like you said, Noah, for offensive line and maybe a coordinator. And who knows, at some point, maybe a head coach as well. Just I don't think it's going to pan out at Arkansas. I could see them winning 3 to 5 games. And honestly, unfortunate as it is for him, I think Pittman probably gets fired this year.
Well, Garth, last and definitely least, which I hate to say it, but it's basically every year, we have the Vanderbilt Commodores as the last team we're going to discuss. So I'm looking at their roster right now, and there's really only 2 players that I recognize immediately, which is they're both quarterbacks, funny enough. Diego Pavia, a graduate transfer from New Mexico State, and Nate Johnson, transfer from Utah, who you remember very well because he did play a good bit last season, running quarterback.
He's actually like a really cool athletic specimen because that dude's super talented.
Mm-hmm. But outside of that, I mean, I think Junior Sherrill at wide receiver, I think he's pretty good. They have a ton of transfers on the offense. They have a transfer tight end, 3 transfer linemen. Defensively, they have 3 transfers that are projected to start as well. But, I'm not going to waste much time on this, Garth, going through their schedule in the SEC. At Missouri, L. Alabama, L. At Kentucky, L. Texas, L. At Auburn, L. South Carolina, L. At LSU, L. Tennessee, L. I think they go 0-8 in the SEC out of conference. Virginia Tech, L. Alcorn State, win. At Georgia State. The fact I think this is kind of a toss-up game is really bad.
Says all you need to know right there.
I guess I'll give them the win, but I'm not entirely confident in that one. And Ball State at home. Again, the fact I think that's kind of a toss-up game is really bad, but I guess I'll give them the win, which I think what, 2-10 or 3-9. I lost count. Either way, I don't think they win a single game in the SEC. They could always pull an upset. They have done that before when they beat the crappy Florida Gators a few years ago is one that sticks out. But I don't know.
Franklin was able to beat Florida and Georgia.
Oh, James Franklin was a great coach, man. They wish they could time travel back about 12 years and get him back. But Clark Lee, I think it's probably a good idea for you to kind of sharpen up that resume, maybe for a coordinator job or something like that, because I think you're going to get fired after this season. I'll give you respect. It is impressive that you managed to last until year 4 under Vanderbilt, but yeah, I don't want to say it because I kind of feel bad for them, but it's just year after year, man. It always seems like they're by far the worst team in the SEC. Garth, do you have any positive things to say about this team, or are you kind of on the same mindset?
I mean, the only positive thing I could say is if Nate Johnson just goes absolutely crazy at quarterback and has a good year. But even with that, I'm right in the same boat, 2 to 3 wins, and that's with them having to win for what most teams would be an easy out-of-conference toss-up game. But yeah, just, obviously they're usually at the bottom of the SEC. The talent gap is almost always huge. And then you go out and lose. I believe they lost their starting quarterback from a year ago to the transfer portal. They lost their 2 best wide receivers. Humphreys went to Georgia. I forget the other guy's name, but I know he transferred.
Will Shepard.
That's it. Yep, Will Shepard. Yep, he transferred as well. Like you said, the SEC tough as always, so I doubt they win any SEC games with this roster. So, yeah, I'm right in the same boat, unfortunately, for Vanderbilt, because I don't really have anything against them. I would like to see them be at least halfway decent. Actually, you know what, Noah? I can find one positive thing that's not hoping that Nate Johnson plays out of his mind for them.
Okay.
They won't be starting this college football season by deciding to randomly, massively renovate a section of their stadium like a week before their home opener, as they did a year ago.
Absolute disaster. Garrett says, "Let's go, gentlemen. NCAA 25 is waiting. We're gonna be there. We're gonna be there soon. But we got some more to quickly blitz through. We're gonna start with our final predictions. So we're gonna do awards and then SEC winners and all that. So we'll start with Offensive Player of the Year. So for these, I kind of played it safe for most of these. I played it safe for this one as well. I just went with Carson Beck. I think he's arguably the best quarterback in the SEC. Heisman front runner, incredible offense around him, good offensive line, skills position's really good. He's got that great running game, running backs by committee to help him open up play action and the deep shots, and he's a good quarterback. So yeah, that's my pick.
Yeah, it pains me to say this, but I actually am going to agree with you, Noah. I will say, so one thing, obviously, it's at this point in time very biased towards quarterbacks. It's like almost impossible to win this award if you're not one. I will say it would be really cool to see somebody like Luther Burden just go absolutely nuts and win this. But who I actually expect to win it is going to be Carson Beck for all the same reasons that you said. Loaded roster around him. He's very experienced and proven. It's not like he's coming in with this year and having no experience or any kind of question marks. And also, too, I feel like even though they did have a really good year last year, they still came up just short. And I feel like that's going to be a really, really motivating factor for the whole roster, but especially him, because I feel like he's probably feeling that sense of, hey, we were so close, but so far, and I'm running out of time. I got to go and get this thing done while I still can. But really the only realistic threat maybe that I could even think of is maybe like a Nussmeier if he just goes absolutely insane. But yeah, I got Carson Beck for sure for all those reasons and it being a quarterback award at this point in time.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting to see Luther Burden win it, or maybe a kind of Raheem Sanders at South Carolina. Jarquez Hunter is a beast as well. But realistically, I think it's going to be a quarterback. It's probably either going to be Beck, Ewers, or Milrow. And I'm going to give a slight edge to Beck on that one. Defensive Player of the Year. Now, I think this one is a lot tougher. And I kind of I wouldn't say it's out of left field one, but it's definitely one that is risky. But Garth, I'll let you start on this one. Who do you have?
Yeah, so this one was tough for me to make a decision on because there's a lot of this one I don't think is anywhere near as clear cut. And there's a lot of guys that you could see realistically making a case for it. The two guys that I got down to are James Pierce of Tennessee and Harold Perkins of LSU, because I do expect him to have a bounce back this year and have a really good year. And he'll be draft eligible. So he's kind of playing for that draft stock this year where he wasn't the past 2 years. But I feel like just kind of a gut feeling based of all the articles I've read this offseason, how high they are on this guy. Like everybody's already ready to write this guy on as the number one draft pick for defensive players in this year's draft. And, this defense is going to be much improved and he's going to be the main reason behind it. I do feel like as long as James Pierce has a solid year, they're probably going to give the award to him.
So you go with James Pierce. I think that's probably a safe pick overall. I have actually gone the exact opposite direction. And if he plays like he did in 2022, I think he could easily win it. But if he plays like he did last year, he's not going to be even close. So it's either one that's going to absolutely blow up in my face or it's going to go perfectly. And I actually have gone with Harold Perkins because I think we have seen that at his best, he can definitely be an all-conference defensive player of the year award-winning type of guy. But last season, there's no way to put it. He went from, I believe, 13 sacks to like 4.5. He was projected to be, that impact player once again for LSU, and it didn't really work out. But I do think he has the talent to do it. I think it probably is between those two guys. Granted, there are a lot of, I think some under-the-radar guys. I think Landon Jackson, Arkansas, is really good. Shamar Turner at A&M is another guy I really like. Michael Williams.
One guy I got as a dark horse, Noah, is actually Princely Umenmielen at Ole Miss, because that guy, as much as I'm kind of like screw that guy this year because of all the trash he talked, he still is a very, very good pass rusher. And at least on paper, that whole Ole Miss defensive line should be really, really good this year. So if he can kind of run up his sack numbers this year and he plays that premium pass rusher type of position, he could definitely attract some attention for that.
Next one is Freshman of the Year. And there's some interesting candidates, but this is one I've gone incredibly safe on, Garth. I have gone with Nico Iamaleava.
Yeah, I would love to say DJ Lagway, Noah, obviously, but I don't think he's going to play enough to have the kind of numbers it would take to win this. And outside of him and Nico, there really wasn't like another. There's a lot of good freshmen that are going to see playing time, but realistic options, I think it's going to be Nico, because whether or not they have a really good year overall, I think he's going to play pretty darn good most of the season. And he does have some experience, and he is still technically a freshman because he got to redshirt. But he's a little bit, he's a year older, a year more experienced than all the other guys that he's going to be up against. So I would have to agree on this one and go with Nico as well.
Coach of the Year. This one is very tough because it's not just, oh, this guy goes 13-0 and he wins it. There's a lot of that. Well, what did this guy do relative to his talent that's tied to it? So it's probably a team you think will be better than a lot of people think they could be. Garth, let's start with you on this one.
This one was really tough now because it's a lot of, do these teams that I think could overachieve, do they actually overachieve? So like Oklahoma, if they were to overachieve and win, say, like 9 games, I think it's very realistic that Venables could get it. Same thing with like Beamer at South Carolina. I feel like whether or not he ends up being the most deserving, I don't think Kirby's going to win it, just because what happens when you're really good for so long, it starts actually becoming harder to win awards because they don't want to just keep giving it to you. They want to go against the grain and pick somebody different. Lane, I don't know. I just can't see him winning it, even if he has a really good year. I'm going to go with kind of a dark horse one and more of just a gut feeling versus who I feel is the most realistic. I'm actually going to go with Elko at Texas A&M because it's his first year there, and I'm actually a little bit higher on them than most. I don't think they're going to do anything crazy, but I do think that they're going to get to like the 8-win mark, and I think that'll be enough for him to win it. It kind of was honestly, it was between Venables and Elko for me, Noah, and just gut feeling I'm going with Elko on this one.
I like it. I like where your head is at. I've gone a little safe with this one, to be honest. I have not gone with Kirby Smart for the reason you said. I think, he's had so much success it actually becomes harder to win an award like this. People will look at him if he goes 13-0, which, again, I'm not saying is a certainty by any means, but if he did, they'd just be like, yeah, well, it's Georgia, and it's Kirby Smart. That's kind of what we expect. So I've gone a little further down, not much. I've actually gone with Steve Sarkisian because I think that's a team that has a lot of media support. I think they're going to be one of the best teams in the SEC. And Sark he seems to be a pretty popular coach as well, and they'll be a very good team. So I've gone with him. But we'll see. Now, next, we have our overachieving team of the season, a team that we think might fly under the radar a bit, that will outperform expectations, I've already briefly alluded to this one earlier. I'm actually going with LSU, man. I think if Nussmeier doesn't hold the offense back, if that offense is still productive, if Harold Perkins can have a rebound year, if that defense improves, talent-wise, I don't think there's a lot of teams that are better than them. I think they could easily be a top 4 team in the SEC. You got to remember, it was just the year before last. They were in the SEC championship game. They beat Alabama. Last season, I think they should have beat Alabama as well. But the problem was Brian Kelly has no idea what a quarterback spy was, and Jalen Miller scored like 5 rushing touchdowns. It was ridiculous. But talent-wise, I still think they're one of the best, and I think in my opinion, they're flying a little under the radar just because of that top 3. But they're still a very good team, man. Like I said earlier, I think they could be better than Ole Miss and Missouri, who I think are both very good teams.
Yeah, so for me, this one's going to be really easy and predictable. I'm going to go with Florida here. Not really so much, no, because I think they're going to go out and have like this crazy, insane year by any means. It's more so based off of the fact that just like the whole perception around this team is, oh, the schedule's way too hard. They're going to suck this year. Billy Napier's going to get fired. The over-under for them is literally 4.5 wins, and actually some places even had it at 3.5 early in the offseason. And like I said earlier in the show, I definitely can see this team winning anywhere from 6 to 8 games this year. So by definition, that would be overachieving. So I'm going to go with Florida for my overachiever.
And then last but not least, before we get into the SC championship game contestants and the winner, we have an underachieving team. Garth, let's start with you on this one. Who do you have?
So this one honestly might not be as predictable as the other one for me. And the reason being, it might not even really be the national media's expectations, but it's more so my own personal expectations. I am actually going to go with Ole Miss here because I think with how long Lane has been there, what they returned this year, all the talent that they brought in transfer portal, this hands down should be a team that can make the title game, and I just don't see it happening. I feel like they have a good year, no doubt. They'll win, 9 or 10 games, but I don't think that they're going to make the SEC title game. And for me personally, I feel like that's underachieving, given the, what's going on there headed into this year.
So for this one, it's kind of tough because it's a team that you would maybe have expectations for, but doesn't quite do as well. So my choice might not be the best, but I guess just because I hate their guts, I've actually gone with Auburn. I think they have a lot of talent on the roster. I mean, they had like close to a top 10 recruiting class at least. But again, I think it comes down to Peyton Thorne at quarterback. I have no idea what he's going to do, and I think it's a complete wild card. I think their schedule's tough, and I think it'll be kind of more of the same. I think they'll be a middling team. And for the talent that they have, I think they're a team that underachieves. I don't think, if you're going from the media angle, I don't think they're a team that has that expectation. So if some people, would not choose them for a label like this, I would understand why. But I think for the talent they have, they should be better than what they were last year. And I think it's going to be more of the same. So that's why I've gone with them.
They actually were, for what it's worth, they were second on my list. But I had Ole Miss just edge them out.
And then last but not least, the teams we have making the championship game and the team that we believe wins the ACC, or excuse me, the SEC. Again, this is another one, Garth, I've gone very safe on. I've gone Georgia and Texas in the SEC championship game. And I usually pick against Georgia to kind of do the reverse jinx. That hasn't worked for me recently. So I've actually gone with Georgia to win the SEC this year.
So I almost fully agree with you because I am also going to play it safe here and go with who I feel are the two most likely teams to make it. That is Georgia and Texas as well, except I do have your Georgia Bulldogs beating them in that title game.
All right. So we agree on 1, 2. We agree on 3 of the things, I think, and then we slightly disagree on the other ones. But again, it's kind of like you went, the guy had number 2, and I did the opposite, so on and so forth. We're usually pretty linked up with these. But, Garth, you talk a big game. It sounds like you know what you're talking about, but we got to put your knowledge to the test here before we get off here. So one thing we have not mentioned with the SEC that we obviously need to touch on before we get off here is All-Americans. So I don't know if you looked at the All-American this year, but I have a little challenge for you. So what I have done, I'm going to put it up real quick here. I have put the numbers of All-Americans each team has, first team, second team, third team, and total, except what I have done is I have taken away the team names. So just based off the numbers.
This is college football as a whole, right? Not just SEC.
These are the SEC teams. This is
okay.
all SEC. Yep.
All SEC. Okay.
Not all Americans overall. So we see the numbers here. Let me zoom out a little bit. So I've ranked them.
You actually know how many one team has for obvious reasons off the top of my head, but other than that, it's going to be a crapshoot.
So we will start. I'll make it easy for me, and we'll start from the bottom. So this team at the very bottom, there are 2 teams that had no All-Americans. Can you guess which they are?
I think one very safe guess is going to be Vanderbilt.
Yep, Vanderbilt is one. Who's the other?
Arkansas?
Incorrect. Just go ahead and put Vandy in here. If you need a hint, I can give you one.
My guess or my gut feeling is South Carolina, but I feel like they got to at least have one.
It is not South Carolina.
Let me pull up the SEC real quick just to make sure I'm not forgetting a team, because sometimes my mind can be very forgetful on me.
I can always give you a hint as well.
Okay, let's see here. Oh, okay. I feel like the other one's Mississippi State.
Correct. It is Mississippi State. Good job. Took you a few guesses, but you got that one.
Yeah.
So Mississippi State and Vanderbilt are the only SEC teams this year that have no All-Americans whatsoever. The next team we have, Garth, had one All-American, and he was a second team.
I feel like this one's got to be Arkansas.
Correct. Landon Jackson, defensive lineman, who I just mentioned a little bit earlier, actually, made the second team, the only one from Arkansas. This next one is interesting, Garth. They only had one All-American, but he was a first-team player.
I feel like I have two teams that I'm thinking here.
Okay.
Either Ole Miss or Tennessee.
Both are incorrect, actually.
Ooh.
I can always give you a hint as
Tough
well.
because it's tough because it's first team. I'm gonna try and limit my hints as much as possible. I'm gonna take a hint on this one, Noah, because what's got me thrown is the first team part of it.
All right, your hint: he is a skills position player.
That makes me lean Missouri because of Burden.
Correct. Luther Burden III, first team All-American, was the only All-American for Tennessee. I knew that hint would probably give that one away. So this next one, two All-Americans, both were first team.
Yeah, see, these teams that only have first team and it's a low number are the ones that are trickiest. So this one might be Ole Miss. See, I know Ole Miss has one first teamer off the top of my head because I did see that they had Princely on there for D-line.
Is that an official guess?
Yeah, I'm going to guess Ole Miss. I just don't know who their other one would be.
Incorrect. It's not Ole Miss.
Not Ole Miss.
Do you need a hint?
Let's see here. First team. Yeah, I'll take a hint. No, these first team only ones are really tough.
You mentioned one of these players not even 10 minutes ago. You picked him for one of the awards.
Trying to remember. It's definitely not Georgia. I know that so it can't be. Oh, Tennessee?
Yep. James Pierce and Cooper Mays.
I forget. That's the Georgia transfer, right?
Yep. He got butthurt that he had to compete for playing time, and so he transferred to Tennessee.
Didn't he get in trouble for bullying somebody too?
I feel like I remember that as well, honestly, yeah. All right, so this next one, we have 3 All-Americans, 2 second team, 1 third team.
2 second team and 1 third team. I feel like actually this is the one that's Florida because I know for sure they don't have any first teams, but I know they had 2 or 3 total between second and third.
It is not Florida.
Ooh. South Carolina?
Incorrect.
Oklahoma?
Incorrect. Can always
Oh,
give you a hint if you want.
we're striking out bad on this one. Yeah, I'll take a hint on this one.
They have a new head coach this year.
Wait, scroll down real quick because I forget all the teams that were mentioned or like out of the race in this one. Oh, Texas A&M?
Correct. All right, and then the next one, Garth, has 3 All-Americans. They have 2 first-teamers and 1 third-team guy.
I feel like this has got to be one of the 2 Red River rivalry teams. Thing is, I feel like Oklahoma's got to be coming up on the list, but it's like, who would they have on first team? I guess I'll just shot in the dark here, Oklahoma.
Correct.
Wow.
Linebacker Danny Strutzman, first team. Billy Bowman Jr., safety, first team. And wide receiver Deion Burks was third team.
Okay.
By the way, I
was
forgot
surprised that they had 2 first teams.
So I forgot to say for A&M, D lineman Shamar Turner was second team. Nick Scarton, another D lineman, was second team. And then offensive lineman Trey Zune the third was third team. So there you go on that one. The next one, 4 All-Americans. Oh, hang on. 4 All-Americans, 1 second team, and 3 third team.
I feel like this is the one that's got to be Florida because I know Montreal is the 1 second teamer that we have.
Is that your final answer?
Yeah.
Correct. It is Florida.
Yeah, I know Montreal is the second. Is it? Yeah, Montreal's the second team.
Jason Marshall.
Yep, Jason Marshall, Eugene Wilson.
Nope, not Eugene Wilson.
Huh, that's weird.
Jeremy Crenshaw and Trey Smack.
Oh, yeah. I forget that. So what's weird, Noah, is the Florida fan base is not high on our special teams at all. Not even really so much because of the players, but because of how much of a fiasco the play calling and the situational awareness has been. But then yet somehow like the SEC media, that's the one thing that they're really high on about Florida.
Yeah, so again, Montrell Johnson, second team running back, cornerback Jason Marshall, third team, and then Jeremy Crenshaw is a punter, third team, kickoff specialist Trey Smack, third team. Next team, 5 All-Americans. They have none on the first team, but 3 on the second team and 2 on the third team.
This one's either got to be I forget. So for first team, do they get just 1 quarterback or 2 total?
It is just 1 quarterback for each team.
So this one, I just realized this whole time we still haven't put good old Kentucky on here. Shot in the dark, Kentucky.
Incorrect.
Texas.
Incorrect. I can always give you a hint as well.
Yeah, I'll take a hint on this one.
Their best player of these players, at least in my opinion, is a running back, which was not on the team last season.
Running back that was not on the team last season. I know it's definitely not Georgia. That's out of the mix because we're too low on the list. Best player was a running back that wasn't on the team last year.
And we have mentioned him a few times on the show.
Oh, wait. Hunter at Auburn?
No, he was on the team last year.
Yeah, that's what I thought, but just a wild guess there. Running back.
Transferred in. His quarterback is Four Eyes.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Brain fart, South Carolina.
Yep. There you go. Oh, shit. Hang on.
I try to forget that Raheem Sanders went there as much of a fan as him. I am, because I really actually want him to come to Florida once I caught wind of ETN was most likely leaving.
So they're all Americans. Raheem Sanders at running back, second team. Linebacker, Debo Williams, second team. Long snapper, Hunter Rogers, second team. Defensive lineman, Tonka Hemingway, third team. What a name that is. And safety, Nick Iamaleava was also third team. Now, next team, they have 5 All-Americans, 2 first team, no second team, and 3 third teams. So your favorite guard, they don't have a ton, but they have a couple first teamers.
Yep. I feel like this has got to be the one that's Auburn, because it's probably Hunter and some random other dude on first team.
So your final answer?
Yeah, because I feel like anything else except for maybe the team that's got 2 first team and 8 second. No, I feel like this one's got to be Auburn.
Correct. It is Auburn.
Who's the other first teamer besides Jarquez Hunter?
So Jarquez Hunter, first team running back. Alex McPherson, brother of Evan McPherson, as kickoff specialist, first team. Linebacker Eugene Asante, third team. Alex McPherson also made it as a place kicker, third team, so players can have more than one.
Interesting little tidbit there that they can make it twice.
And then return specialist Keontae Scott was also third team. This next one, 3 first teamers and 3 third teamers for 6 total.
I'm going to go with, I feel like there's one team that is not on the list yet that's got to be coming up, and that's going to be Kentucky.
You are correct. It is Kentucky. So
no idea who's on their list, though.
Okay, so defensive lineman Deion Walker first. Defensive back Maxwell Hairston first. Return specialist Barry Brown first. Offensive lineman Marquise Cox third. Linebacker Jamon Dumas Johnson third. And all-purpose, which is a position, Barry and Brown third team. So Barry and Brown made it twice, actually. All right, so you're down to 5 left, Garth. The last one with 6 players. They have 3 first, 1 second, and 2 third.
All right, let's see here.
You got to think of the teams you haven't said as well.
Yeah, I feel like, I don't know if it's for sure this spot or not, but Ole Miss has got to be coming up. Who else haven't we said? Oh, you know what? Let's go with a guess of LSU here.
Is that your final answer?
Yeah, we're going to go with that.
You are incorrect.
It was Ole Miss.
Yep, it was. So
that was my first thought, but I was like, nah.
So, wide receiver Trey Harris, first team. Tight end Caden Prieskorn, first team. Defensive lineman Walter Nolan, first team. Defensive lineman Jared Ivey, second team. Running back Ulysses Bentley, third team. And then the second third team player, your favorite, Princely Umanmalayan, third team. All right.
I've only learned his name because I had to hear it so much over the years. I remember when I first seen that name, I was like, wait a second, what? I believe, actually, fun facts, I know his younger brother definitely is in college football. I want to say he is on the Texas A&M roster and that he also plays defensive line.
You just reminded me of something. I was looking at one of the players I wanted to talk about earlier. It might have been Nico. He has a brother named Madden.
Madden?
His name is literally Madden. I'm not joking. But yeah, that's freaking wild. Anyway, 4 teams left. Next one has 9 total, 3 first team, 5 second team, 1 third team.
Okay, so I'm pretty confident I know who the first and second are going to be. This one is going to either be I know it's one of 2 teams. I just don't know for sure which one it is. I am going to go with LSU here.
You would be correct. It is LSU.
Okay, so now this is where the list gets a little bit easier because I'm pretty sure I know who the next team's going to be.
It gets easier because you know the 3 teams that are left, but the numbers are pretty close. These guys dominated the All-Americans. So before we do that, the LSU guys were tackle Will Campbell, first team, who was I'm pretty sure he was the highest rated player in CFB 25. Harold Perkins at linebackers, first team. All-purpose Xavier Thomas, first team. Wide receiver Kylan Lacey, second team. Tight end Mason Taylor, second team. Tackle Emory Jones with an E, not an O, second team. Cornerback Major Burns, which I have to say is a very unfortunate name. It is a cool name, but it's an unfortunate name for a cornerback if you get burned.
Oh, yeah, yep.
Second team. Return specialist Xavier Thomas, so he made it twice as second team. And then long snapper Slade Roy, third team. So you got 3 teams left. This next one, 13 players total, 2 first team, 8 second team, which is the most, and 3 third team.
Yep, and I'm going to go with none other than the Alabama Crimson Tide.
Incorrect.
Wow.
It surprised me too.
It's got to be Texas then.
Correct. It is Texas.
Ewers is on first team.
No, Ewers is second team because Carson Beck is first team.
Oh, yeah, true. Okay.
All right. Tackle Kelvin Banks Jr. first. Kicker Brett Aubin first. Quarterback Quinn Ewers second. Running back C.J. Baxter second. Wide receiver Isaiah Bond, who they got from Alabama, second. Linebacker Anthony Hill Jr. second. Cornerback Jade Barron second. Safety Andrew Makuba second. Cornerback Malik Muhammad second. Kickoff specialist Will Stone second. Center Jake Majors third. Defensive end Trey Moore third. And all-purpose player Jaden Blue, who's a running back, third. Now, these last 2 guards, you know the teams, but you have to get the order right. So the first one has the most first team with 6, 5 second team, and 4 third team for 15 total. But the other team has the most total at 16. They have 5 first team, 4 second team, but they have the most third team at 7. So you know one of them is Georgia and one of them is Alabama. But which one do you think is which?
Yeah, so real quick before I make my predictions on that, one fun fact with Texas, one of the players that you mentioned that I know very, very well for unfortunate circumstances is running back C.J. Baxter because he was a 5-star and he might have even been the number 1 running back in his recruitment class out of Gainesville, Florida. Ended up choosing Texas over Florida. But for the picks, I feel like I'm gonna have to go against what I would expect it to be. And for that reason, I'm going to go with Georgia at number 2 with the most first-team picks.
Is that your final answer?
Yep.
You are correct. It is.
I was thinking the whole way Georgia was going to be the most overall picks, but what made me flip my pick around was the first-team number being slightly higher.
Yeah, so for Georgia, quarterback Carson Beck first, running back Trevor Etienne first, guard Tate Ratledge first, defensive lineman Nazir Stackhouse first, linebacker Michael Williams first, and safety Malachi Starks first. Second team, guard/tackle, Xavier Truss. Guard, Dylan Fairchild. Linebacker, your guy, Smile Munden Jr. Punter, Brett Thorson. And all-purpose Dylan Bell, which makes sense because he's listed as a wide receiver, but he played a lot of running back last season. And then third team, wide receiver Dominic Lovett. Tight end Oscar Delp. Tackle Ernest Green III. And cornerback Dalen Everett. For Alabama, first teamers, guard Tyler Booker, linebacker Deontay Lawson, safety Malachi Moore, punter James Burnett, and long snapper Neelan Hibbett. Second team, the guy who absolutely loves the transfer portal, tackle Caden Proctor, center Parker Brailsford, defensive lineman Tim Smith, kicker Graham Nicholson, and for the third team, quarterback Jalen Milrow, running back Justice Haynes, guard Jaden Roberts, defensive lineman Tim Keenan III, linebacker Jihad Campbell, cornerback Damani Jackson. And last but not least is safety Keon Sabb, who has to fill in for one Caleb Downs, who transferred out. And that is it. That's your challenge. You know what? I got to say, Garth, you struggled at times, especially with the lower ones, but you know what? You did well enough to where I can say you can at least pretend to know what you're talking about.
You totally caught me off guard with that because I was fully expecting something like maybe name this random SEC offensive player of the year from 1982. And if we had done that, I would have, unless Noah put a Florida Gator pick that I would know for sure off the top of my head, I would not have gotten a single one.
Well, Garth, you got to prepare because next week I'm going to have another quiz for you, but it's not going to be the exact same. It's going to be different. I can't have you, trying to guess what it is and researching. It's going to be different.
You're going to have me out here just doing random research of all kinds this whole week in my free time.
Yeah, man. Well, hey, anything to distract you from your crazy, chaotic workplace with the screaming Puerto Rican lady and all them. But, yeah, that's all I have for tonight. That was a really good show talking about the SEC. I got to admit, even though it was almost 2.5 hours, it's way shorter than I thought it would be because we have had a 3.5-hour show before. Garth, do you have anything you kind of want to say here before we wrap it up for the night?
Just a huge thank you to all the guys that tuned in, left some comments. We're excited to see us back. Your guys' support means the world to us. It feels really good to be back. Was really excited to do this tonight. Really excited for college football being right around the corner. I was kind of in like a slow mode pace, if I will, just because of how busy I've been away from this in my real life. But playing NCAA 25 with all the guys got the gears churning. All right, guys, it's right around the corner. So just really, really excited. Going to be a crazy year across all college football, not even just the SEC. New playoff format. Also, too, no, we didn't touch on it because this is more of a conference preview show versus just college football in general. Two really big changes, 2-minute warnings. And also, one thing that I think will be a huge benefit if they use it well and adjust quickly, quarterbacks will now have the headset inside their helmets to be able to communicate with the coaches. So you won't see as much of, the crazy hand signs and the huge flashcards on the sideline. They'll be able to just radio in a lot more of those calls. So it'd be cool to see how that works. But yeah, just really grateful, Noah, that we were able to hop on here and do this, and everybody that tuned in showed the love and support, and just really, really excited for the shows to come in the next few weeks and for football to be back because it feels like an absolute eternity. Weirdly, this feels like one of the longest off seasons ever, honestly. Because I'm just ready for it to be here and to know what happens and how good or not Florida ends up being.
Yeah, or more realistically, how bad they're going to be and how many games they lose. But yeah, man, solid return show. Thanks for all the interaction, everybody. It was a pretty interactive show for sure. We'll be back next week, either Thursday or Friday, with Big Ten show. But until then, from myself, Noah Dog Diver, and my co-host and buddy, Garth Charger Patrick, this has been another episode of Sweet Tea here on the Sports Box Network. Until next time, stay safe. I hopefully play the hell out of College Football 25 for us, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for watching this episode of Sweet Tea on the Sports Box. Please remember to follow us on all of our social media outlets. On Facebook at Sportsbox Show, Twitter at Sportsbox Show, Instagram at The Sportsbox Show. Find us on YouTube and join Outside the Box, our Facebook sports discussion group. The Sports Box is brought to you by our sponsor, Showcase Sports in Hamilton. Showcase Sports for the elite athlete. And also our friends over at CrowdPlay. Download the free CrowdPlay app today and use promo code THEBOX at sign up for 10 free points. Thank you for joining us.